Chapter 1, Chapter 1. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The dragon came out of nowhere. Literally, out of nowhere. Appearing overhead in a flash of light and nearly barreling into an airborne Toothless who got uncomfortably close to shaking Hiccup loose in his sudden move to avoid being hit. It took Toothless a few seconds to right himself, and in that time the dragon vanished below the tree line, out of sight. Still a little breathless, Hiccup stared down towards where the dragon had vanished. What the? He hadn't gotten a good look, occupied as he had been clinging to Toothless and wishing he'd worn his flight suit, but he tried to recall every detail of what he had seen. The appearance had just been so sudden, though. A changeling, maybe. But the wing shape didn't seem right, and he hadn't seen that coloring before. Whatever dragon it was, it had to have similar camouflage abilities to appear out of nowhere like that. Hiccup leaned forward, his hand on Toothless' head. Come on, Bud, and Toothless dove after the mysterious dragon. Camouflage capabilities would make it a bit tricky to find the dragon, but Hiccup had done more with less, and, as Toothless touched down, he realized he certainly didn't have nothing. Whatever kind of dragon it had been, its landing had been far from graceful, littering the ground with bent and broken trees and branches. Hiccup slipped off Toothless and started trying to decipher which way the dragon had gone after crashing, but that was when the shouting started. Come back here and fight me, you coward. Hiccup and Toothless both froze where they stood, the dragon looking up at the Viking with wide eyes that almost seemed hopeful. The rider shook his head even as he had to calm his own racing heart. Can't be. Stay here, Toothless, he told his dragon as he headed towards the voice. Toothless warbled and started following, until Hiccup put a hand out to him and said, I mean it, Bud. Stay here, but stay close. You know, just in case. After all, Hiccup didn't know anyone who sounded like that. Well, not anyone alive. This could be a new enemy. Or maybe some wayward soul who had simply been scooped up by a dragon. It had happened before. Either way, best not to startle the stranger with a night fury unless he had to. Or maybe. If it wasn't a stranger, it still wasn't him. It could be a dragon, the dragon. Maybe it could mimic voices. Fishlegs would be fascinated. After he was done being terrified. Either way, caution was smart. Or so Astrid would tell him. Always prepare for the worst, because the best rarely happens when you want it to. He moved as quietly as he could, trying desperately to use every little bit of stealth Astrid had painstakingly beat into him, which was admittedly only a marginal amount. There wasn't a ton that could be done about the peg leg. He checked that his flame sword was strapped to his side, but pulling it out now would give him away. He was growing closer, close enough that he could hear the shuffling and trampling of whoever, or whatever, lay ahead of him. The strange enemy, or hapless victim, or dragon, or his father. Hiccup froze. Actually, he might have died. Was he dead? Or hallucinating? Yes, hallucinating was definitely a possibility. He could have eaten something, or the twins could have dosed him, or the dragon. The mysterious dragon, it could be causing this, somehow. Surely. Weirder things have happened, right? But the word rushed out of him like the air in his lungs after a hard fall. Dad. Before he could blink, an axe was inches from Hiccup's chest, the full might and fury of Chief Stoic the Vast leering down at him, and Hiccup only had the presence of mind to be grateful that his father hadn't been in an axe-throwing mood. Who are you? How did you find me? Hiccup blinked hard. Hallucination. Hallucination, right. Has to be. But then Stoic pressed his axe close enough to graze the bottom of Hiccup's chin, and nope, not a hallucination. I don't understand. Did the dragon get you? Have you seen it? Dragon, Hiccup repeatedly numbly. Dragon. He knew that word. Definitely knew it. It sure sounded familiar. Dragon. The dragon. Right, yes, right, yellow scales, 4 wings, that dragon. Are there other dragons about? It wasn't a rhetorical or teasing question, but a man asking how many enemies were around him. No, no, I saw it crash into the ground and, wait, you crashed with it. Hiccup suddenly realized. What were you doing with that dragon? Stoic leaned back from Hiccup just long enough to raise his axe. What do you think I was trying to do, boy? Oh. Oh. Oh no. Hiccup briefly closed his eyes as he had to fight to survive another fresh wave of grief. Thor above, he had thought he was done with this. Grieving the first time had been hard. Really, really hard, made more complicated by the fact that he was also suddenly chief of a torn-up village, and a chief of a torn-up village had no time to wallow and mourn and grieve. But this man, this wasn't his dad. Not the one he had lost, at least. This was him from before. This was Chief Stoic the Vast. Focused as he was on not sobbing or screaming, Hiccup almost missed Stoic's next question. Now, where did it go? We need to find it and kill it before it gets back to Berk. Back to Berk. A chief protects his own. Hiccup's eyes jerked open to find that Stoic had already moved, and Hiccup hurried after him. Dad, wait. Stoic whipped around, startled, and Hiccup realized that the man probably hadn't heard him clearly the first time. Wincing, Hiccup continued, You can't. Dad, you can't go back to Berk. With narrowed eyes and a tight grip on his axe, Chief Stoic asked, Why are you calling me that? Hiccup glanced up at the sky, hoping he'd find some answers or a dragon to swallow them both whole. You know. Because you are. My father, that is. You're not. I am, though. Assuming you're Chief Stoic of the Hooligan tribe. Yeah, okay, yeah, so something's happened. I'm guessing it has to do with that dragon, because you're not where you're meant to be. Or, when, I suppose, would be the right term. What are you talking about? Who are you? Out with it. I'm Hiccup, he cried out. When his father looked doubtful, Hiccup pressed on, I am. Just, 6 or more years in the future. How old should I, Hiccup, your Hiccup, be to you? As Hiccup prattled and stumbled through his words, his hands flying erratically as they always did when he was particularly nervous or excited, Stoic's axe lowered to his side and his anger faded from his expression. Belatedly, Hiccup realized Stoic's gaze was just below eye level. It was on his chin, on the scar that had given his identity away to his mother too. 14, Stoic finally answered. Hiccup's 14. Right. Okay. Yeah, okay, yeah, Hiccup said, fully aware he's babbling and unable to stop it. So that would make it about 7 years. You're 21. Stoic asked, voice soft in a way Hiccup rarely heard. Rarely in that he only really heard it when he was dying or recovering from almost dying. Yeah. Yeah. Which, is what I meant. Before, I mean. When I said you were in the wrong place. It must have something to do with that dragon, some capability we've never even heard of. I mean, even in the Dragon Eye we never saw a record of. Wait, where are you going? Hiccup shouted, realizing mid-ramble that his dad had started trudging through the woods again. What do you think? Stoic called out without turning around. We need to find this dragon and fix this. And how? Oh shit, Hiccup swore as he nearly fell flat on his face. He barely managed to catch himself, but in his stumble he saw a shadow in his peripheral, toothless, eager and impatient and worried. Hiccup waved him away, but the Night Fury only had eyes for Stoic. Hiccup knew Toothless still felt guilty about what happened to his dad, knew that the dragon still blamed himself in the way that Hiccup blamed himself for starting the war with Drago in the first place. But this was not that man. This man, this Stoic, would not hesitate if given the chance to slay a Night Fury. Get a Strid, Hiccup whisper shouted at Toothless as he waved him away, carefully keeping an eye on his father's progress. Do not let her bring Stormfly. Hey. But, you hear me? Finally Toothless turned away from Stoic as the man vanished into the forest to look at his rider. Hiccup swore again, urging Toothless to go once more before running off after his dad. Wait, Dad, you can't. Hiccup tripped again, this time crashing down like a dragon, and Stoic paused, sighing, like Hiccup stumbling about behind him was to be expected. Which might be fair. I won't go back to Berk, son, Stoic assured, but I can't very well leave this dragon to roam about. Besides, if you're right and telling the truth, then I need to get back to my Hiccup. Frustrated and aching and now covered in brambles, Hiccup bluntly asked his father, "How?" Stoic raised his axe again. "What do you mean how?" Hiccup rolled his eyes. "Just like the old days. I mean, how are you going to find the dragon? When you do, what are you going to do? How are you going to get it to take you back home? Killing it will do nothing but strand you here. So tell me, Stoic the Vast, what's your plan?" It took a moment of stunned silence for Hiccup to realize that his dad was definitely not used to him speaking like that, and the mocking accent on his name was probably a step too far. Hiccup looked away and tried to calm himself down, taking a moment to push himself to standing. This Stoic didn't know better, Hiccup reminded himself. He would one day, but he didn't now. We need a plan. We need time. We don't have time. The dragon could be anywhere. It could be getting away. And finding it right now with no idea of what to do next doesn't do us any good either. Stoic glared at him and, oh, his dad was not used to Hiccup being eye level while arguing. For the first time, Hiccup felt the fight being unfair. But in his favor. After all, Hiccup had a lot of experience fighting with every version of his father, but this man had never fought against an adult Hiccup who was confident in his skill set and stood his ground. "We need a plan," Hiccup repeated. Stoic's eyes narrowed, but he asked through clenched teeth, "What would you propose?" "We should." Hiccup. Hiccup whirled around. "Astrid," he shouted back. Quickly, he told his dad, "Wait here. Please." He waited for his dad to roll his eyes and make an exaggerated gesture at his unmoving feet before rushing towards the sound of Astrid's voice. Astrid. She found him fast. She was always good at that, grabbing his shoulders and looking him over for any injuries. "What happened?" "Toothless found me and he wouldn't let Stormfly take off and then he wouldn't take me to you directly, just kept nudging me this way and—" "What is going on, Hiccup?" "I'm fine," Hiccup assured her, gently prying her hands from where she was still moving around his body for signs of injuries. I'm not hurt. But something's happened." "What something?" "Astrid." Her reaction was sudden and instinctive, jerking back from Hiccup and standing rigid straight, at attention before her chief. Or rather, the man who once had been. Shaking her head in disbelief, she said, "Chief Stoic. How are you?" She glanced at Hiccup uncertainly. "I told you to stay there," Hiccup commented to his father deadpan. "How could I miss the opportunity to see how my most promising warrior has grown?" Stoic responded warmly. "How are you, Miss Horferson?" Astrid looked at Hiccup once more and he just shrugged. "That would be General Horferson," she corrected lightly. Stoic laughed, the big belly laugh that made everyone want to come closer, to share in his joy, and made Hiccup want to shrink back even further. "Of course. General at such a young age, I should have guessed. Even at 14, I knew you'd excel at dragon killing. Best warrior of your generation." Hiccup saw the way Astrid froze, understanding hitting her. "Right. Dragon killing. We think a dragon did this." Hiccup rushed in to cut off that line of conversation. "Some kind we haven't seen before likely, but I didn't get a good look. It appeared out of nowhere in the sky and crashed down to the ground and when I went to investigate I found," Hiccup gestured at his dad. "Well, him, but I don't actually know what happened on his end. I was fighting the damn thing and it grabbed me." Stoic shouted, suddenly back to being irritated. "Pulled me straight into the sky and some light blinded me like the sun and then we were crashing." "Was the dragon injured?" Astrid asked. Stoic fisted his axe in both hands. "I got a few good licks in, but clearly it wasn't downed quite yet. It scurried off right after we crashed." Hiccup, understanding Astrid's line of questioning, asked, "On foot, you mean?" "I." The younger Vikings looked at each other. "It's injured," Astrid confirmed. Hiccup nodded. "Right. It might not be fully downed, but it can't fly well most likely. And hopefully if it's injured it can't repeat its time flying, or whatever." "Time flyer?" Astrid shouted, grinning at Hiccup. "Don't act like you weren't just about to name it that." Hiccup glanced at his father uncomfortably before figuring it was safe enough to agree. "Right. The time flyer. Sure. The point is, if it's injured, that means we have time to find it and come up with a plan. Hiccup stared into Astrid's eyes, needing her to understand that somehow, we're going to have to train this dragon without my father knowing. Astrid nodded. We should take your dad, Chief Stoic, to Mildew's old place for now. It's out of the way and unoccupied. Without a good view of Berk below too. It was probably their best option outside of leaving his father to sit on a log in the woods. Good idea. Stoic agreed, looking over at Astrid appraisingly. You need to be a good strategist to be general of Berk. Astrid seemed pleased at his comment, but after a quick glance at Hiccup something in her expression shifted. Of course she told Stoic plainly, with pointed eyes on Hiccup, but I take my cues from my chief. It took a moment for Astrid's meaning to sink in and Hiccup cringed as Stoic's wide, disbelieving eyes landed on him. Chief, he asked. You've been made chief. Don't sound too shocked, Hiccup said, trying to make his tone sound light, but it just came off with an uncomfortable chuckle. He cleared his throat and then motioned north. Mildew's is this way. We'll want to get there before nightfall and it's a bit of a trek. Especially without dragons. Notes. I really love exploring just what that sudden shift must have been like for Hiccup when he was 15, and how his relationship with his dad changed too. Chapter 2. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. For a good long while, the walk was quiet and tense. Hiccup would see flashes of shadow in his periphery and have to motion Toothless to stay away, only for Toothless to slink back 15 minutes later. Not to mention Hiccup kept stumbling and tripping. Being chief kept him on the ground a lot more than before, but he wasn't used to doing so much walking on uneven ground like this. After Hiccup's 7th stumble, Astrid caught him and said, "We should take a break." Hiccup glanced at his father and ripped his arm away from her. "I'm fine." Stoic laughed lightly and Hiccup felt that sound in his bones. "You need stamina and coordination to be a respectable chief, son. You can't be stumbling in front of other leaders or during a battle." Astrid seemed to startle at this comment and Hiccup only rolled his eyes, moving to sit on a large boulder to readjust his peg leg that had been knocked off its placement slightly in that last stumble. "I'm not tripping and stumbling around Berk. Believe it or not, we've actually made big improvements to our paving and..." Hiccup. Stoic cried out and Hiccup jerked his head up, panicked that he'd spotted a dragon, spotted Toothless, but Stoic stared only at him. Or rather at his foot and its distinct lack of foot. Ah. Right. He didn't take his eyes off the peg leg even as Hiccup lowered it back to the ground. It was almost heartening to hear the way his father's voice trembled as he asked, "What happened?" "A dragon." Astrid rushed forward to say before Hiccup could even begin to think of how to answer. She met Hiccup's eyes and he knew that look. It was the one that said, "Trust me. I'm about to do something seemingly crazy, but I need you to trust me." "Hiccup killed a dragon," she continued, "and not just any dragon, the Queen of Dragons. He did the impossible and all it cost him was his foot." "All?" Hiccup asked incredulously as his father repeated, dumbfounded, "Queen of Dragons." "We probably shouldn't say anything else about it," Astrid responded to Stoic airily. "We don't know how this time flying works and we don't want to change anything, but you should know." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "It was the size of a mountain, this dragon. And Hiccup saved all of Berk by killing it. Is that true?" Stoic asked, finally meeting Hiccup's eyes and sounding like he was afraid to believe it. Of course he was. Astrid was effectively telling him that Hiccup was the dragon-killing Viking warrior of his dreams, the exact sort of ideal that Hiccup spent years dismantling in his father's head, even after the whole Red Death business. But what Astrid was saying was smart. Strategic even. No lies to keep track of, just a carefully worded truth that would buy them some trust and respect from Stoic. Trust and respect that gave them the tiniest shred of a chance of getting the man to listen to them. Maybe. So, gritting his teeth, Hiccup answered, "Yeah. That happened. Not the most fun memory, I'll say," he added as he stood once more, hoping that would keep his father from asking follow-up questions. It was clear Stoic was trying to keep his eyes on Hiccup's, but they kept drifting down to his leg. "Of course. Dragon killing, it is dangerous work. Sometimes it is too easy to forget how dangerous. Yeah, well, a friend of mine told me once that it's only fun if you get a scar out of it. You always do take everything too far, Astrid lightly joked, poorly concealed concern in her eyes. You know me, Hiccup shook his head, tired of playing pretend already. Come on. Sundown is creeping up fast and we're almost there. Of course, Sun Stoic agreed, now easily falling into step next to Hiccup rather than trudging on ahead. Best we get moving. Hash hash hash. It's, not ideal, Astrid agreed as Stoic scrambled for something to say, the three of them gazing up at Mildew's creaking old dilapidated home. And Mildew, is he? No. Or? We don't know, Hiccup answered. He left a few years back. He had a, difference of opinion with the rest of Berk. We haven't seen him since. I know it's not right of me to say, especially as chief, but I must say that I won't mourn the man. Uppity, righteous little bastard. Hiccup snorted. You're telling me? Astrid took the initiative and stomped forward, pushing open the slightly molded door for them. It's sturdy and standing and we can get supplies to you up here soon. I know Mildew kept some wood around back. If we're lucky it's stayed properly covered and will still be good to use. It'll be a long night, though. Hiccup, would you mind helping me carry enough wood inside? The question was clearly pointed, and when Hiccup hesitated, Stoic shooed him outside. Bah. Go. Have your talk. There is plenty in here to keep me busy, he told them, grimacing as wiped a finger on the small dining table that probably wouldn't have even fit a second plate if they tried. Not that Mildew ever had guests. No longer having to hide behind pretense, Astrid grabbed Hiccup's sleeve and roughly yanked him outside. Both of them silently waited to get 20 or so paces away from the house before speaking, and even then their voices were hushed. What in Thor's name is happening? Astrid demanded. You think I know? What I said earlier is all I've got. There was a dragon. It crashed. It's out there somewhere. And it pulled your father from the past. If you have another explanation, I would love to hear it, because the current one sounds impossible, I know. Astrid calmed at that, or rather, she didn't calm down so much as she moved into general mode, the version of herself that was always cool under pressure and ready to work up a plan. Can you draw it? Probably. I'll have to do some guessing though. And Stormfly and I can backtrack to where it crashed, see if we can find it. We'll need to trap it. But how do we trap something that can fly away through time? I know, Astrid agreed, sounding equally frustrated. I'll bring Fish Legs with me. He can help me brainstorm. What about me? Astrid looked at him like he'd grown a second head. What about you? She repeated, then gestured to the house. Hiccup looked behind him, like he didn't know what she meant. You can't expect me to stay with him the whole time. Do you trust him to stay put? Not a chance. So? I'm Berk's chief, Astrid. I would say Berk has a surplus of those right now. That's not funny. Astrid tilted her head back and forth in mock consideration and did a poor job of not smiling. It's a little funny. He's not. Hiccup cut himself off and Astrid's amusement dropped. He shook his head and shuffled, and Astrid stepped closer and put a hand on his shoulder, waiting for him to meet her eyes. That's not my dad, Astrid, he finally said. He is, though. I know this is strange, but... No, I don't mean, Hiccup sighed. It doesn't matter. I can't stay here with him all by myself. Not forever. Astrid studied his face carefully and he was afraid she would press the issue, but instead she just answered, stay the night with him. I'll go and see if I can find any hint of this dragon. If not, I'll send Snotlout to bring you and your dad supplies and start brainstorming with Fish Legs. You work on your drawing and get anything else you can out of your father about this dragon. In the morning we'll all regroup and come up with a long-term plan. Okay. Hiccup ran his hands down his face, annoyed with how much Astrid's plan made sense. Okay. Wait. Gobber, he realized. What about him? Send him with Snotlout. Hell, send him instead of Snotlout. Gobber was friends with this version of my dad and we can trust him to keep his mouth shut about everything this stoic doesn't know. Just explain the situation. It would be familiar to the man. He'd been a buffer between the two haddocks for years. Okay, Astrid said, overly gently so that Hiccup knew to brace himself for her next question. And your mom? Hiccup grimaced. Don't tell her. Hiccup. Don't tell her yet. Or maybe ever. I don't know. Can that be one of those long-term decisions we make tomorrow? Astrid nodded. Yeah. Of course. And if anyone needs me, I'll tell them you're having a fly night. I don't think Toothless will be leaving you tonight anyways, she commented, waving to the dragon who slinked back into the shadows once he realized he had been spotted. Hiccup nodded gratefully. It was a good answer. Every now and then, Hiccup got overwhelmed with being chief, with all of the responsibilities that bound him to the earth. Groundsick, Astrid jokingly called it, and he needed to spend some time in the air with Toothless. He tried to pick quiet nights and made sure Astrid knew so that if anyone needed the chief, she was prepared to act in his stead. Or come find him, if need be, but she was always loath to interrupt those rare evenings. You should take him with you, Hiccup told her, eyes still tracking where he knew his dragon hid. I would love to. But we both know he won't. Hiccup sighed. Yeah. Astrid watched him and shook her head. I don't understand. I know that it's complicated that he's here, that he doesn't know we're friends with dragons now, but... Hiccup, this is a gift. It's more time with your father. In this moment, Hiccup realized just how much he didn't like talking about his life before Toothless, and how much this meant he didn't talk about it. Hiccup and Stoic's tumultuous past wasn't exactly a secret, but maybe the depth of it wasn't common knowledge either. Or maybe it was just hard to think about. Maybe people didn't want to remember how their beloved chief and their beloved hero once acted around each other. Felt about each other. How Stoic had made Hiccup feel for the first 15 years of his life. Useless. I'll be fine. Astrid shook her head again. Wait. That's not what I... Send Gobber when you can and tell him to bring some sketching supplies, Hiccup interrupted, already walking back to Mildew's house. I didn't bring any with me. Fresh blankets would probably be smart too. Oh, and definitely don't tell the twins, Astrid answered in unison with Hiccup. Yeah, obviously. But, Hiccup. Try to convince you know who to go with you, he said, waving at Toothless in the brush with one hand and the other about to land on the door. We'll talk again. Firewood, Hiccup. Astrid shouted at him, exasperated. Right. The whole excuse they had for talking. Hiccup took his hand off the door and made a show of twisting his body to go get firewood from the back of the house. On it. Notes. Next chapter is Astrid's POV. Question: do you think the twins would be involved? I go back and forth. Hiccup especially is very pro the whole team historically, but this feels incredibly sensitive, both for him personally and also like the slightest slip up could ruin everything. Thoughts? I'm leaning towards just having them involved with dragon tracking and not Stoic, but does that feel disingenuous to Hiccup's character? Am I going to regret asking fanfic commenters this question? I reserve the right to disagree if I decide to, lol. Chapter 3, Chapter 3. Notes. Time for some Astrid POV. And some Hiccup and Gobber and Hiccup childhood feels. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Astrid tried to get Toothless to come with her, to fly even for a few minutes, but he refused, planting his belly on the ground heavily. If she wasn't so worried about the dragon, it would almost be comical. Toothless could be balancing precariously on one toe and Astrid still wouldn't have been able to move the dragon, even if she had had Stormfly with her. So instead she patted the dragon softly on the nose and promised she would send Gobber with some fish. She would just have to hope Toothless would eat. She had no idea when Stoic had last eaten and potentially even less idea of when Hiccup last had, she realized as she walked far enough from Mildew's to whistle for Stormfly. In the wake of his father's death and his sudden rise to chiefdom, Hiccup's eating and sleeping habits had tanked hard. The other riders and Valka and Gobber had all taken to carrying food with them at all times, specifically so that if they ever saw Hiccup they could force him to eat something, because he certainly wasn't sitting down for meal times those days. Sleep had been harder for them to fix, but it got to a point where Hiccup's body more or less started shutting down on him, and he eventually got the message. So, yes, Hiccup ate an okay amount, though there was a reason he was still lean, and he slept a decent amount some nights, so he still always looked a little tired, but nothing about it was regular. He still missed sitting down for the midday meal more often than he didn't. He was just better at grabbing food on the go himself or making sure he ate more at his next meal to compensate. And today had been one of those days where Astrid hadn't seen him much. She had been running drills with the A-team and Hiccup had been doing harvest progress checks, likely flying back from the southern tip of the island they had started utilizing a couple years back for a few isolated farms. Back before dragons, the land would have been considered too far from Berk to really be practical or desirable, but with a dragon the commute wasn't more than a quarter of an hour. All that to say, before she went to track the mysterious dragon, before she went to go brainstorm with fish legs, before she went to go lie to Valka, she found Gobber. It was practical. Gobber would bring the Haddock men supplies that they would need soon, but Astrid took a moment to collect herself before entering the lit forge. Stoic was Astrid's chief, the father of the man she loved, and a great leader she admired. But to Gobber, Stoic was his best friend. Finally, Astrid straightened out her back and marched into the forge like it was a battle. Perhaps, a bit too much. Gobber startled at her sudden entrance. "General," he said as a greeting, which clearly showed he thought she was here on serious matters. "Can I help you with something?" She took a deep breath and forced her body to relax. "No. Sorry, no." "Well, yes." Gobber raised an eyebrow. "Which is it? You got a weapon that needs fixing?" "No, but I do need your help. It's just with something less conventional." Gobber said, waving his tooled hand to urge her to continue. "A dragon crashed, a little bit north of Raven's Point," she started with because she didn't know how else to. Or maybe she was buying herself time. She tried to explain what Hiccup had told her, how he didn't recognize it as it nearly collided into him and Toothless before it vanished into the forest below. "That sounds like a problem," Gobber agreed, "but forgive me when I say I'm not sure it sounds like my problem. Is Hiccup all right?" "Yes." "Well," Astrid shook her head, dismissing the memory of how Hiccup had looked when she had called his father's return a gift. "Yes. He's fine. The problem is that the dragon didn't crash alone. Apparently it brought someone with it. Someone from the past." Now Gobber's eyes narrowed. "The past? An old enemy?" "The opposite, actually." Finding no other way around it, in a big puff of air, Astrid told him, "Stoic. The dragon brought Stoic with him." Gobber flinched backwards just a bit, moving from leaning in towards her to standing up straight, but otherwise didn't react. "Odd trick of the light, then. I could see how that would upset Hiccup." "Not a trick of the light, lass. I talked to him, Gobber. Stoic. I watched him grab onto Hiccup when he tripped. He's real. We think this dragon can fly through time somehow." Now Gobber sank to one of his workbenches. "We took him to Mildew's house. We didn't know where else to go where he wouldn't. We're not sure what else to do, but Hiccup's with him right now. He asked you to bring supplies. Food, blankets, his sketching materials so he can try to draw this dragon. Tomorrow we'll try to figure out how to track the dragon, trap it, and make it take Stoic back. We're hoping that it's too injured to time fly again before we find it." But Astrid's voice trailed off as she realized Gobber wasn't looking at her. In her own discomfort, she had slipped back into action-minded general mode. "But Gobber. He's back?" Gobber asked quietly in her silence. Astrid nodded. "Yeah." And Gobber looked so overwhelmed with relief that it made Astrid remember a big reason why this wasn't a relief. "There is a problem though." "You mean besides Stoic being carried through time after his death? It's about when Stoic was carried from." "When? What do you mean?" Astrid saw the realization dawn on him. "Ah. He's from before, is he?" "Yeah. We've kept him away from other dragons, although Toothless won't stop sulking around the perimeter." Gobber nodded miserably. That dragon always blamed himself. And we're mostly not answering his questions. Mostly. Well, we couldn't exactly dance around the missing foot, Astrid defended, though admittedly she had wanted to be able to brag about Hiccup to Stoic. She knew that her old chief had worried about Hiccup's future on Berk, and she had wanted him to know that Hiccup was worthy of his title, even if the title meant something different these days. Or maybe because it meant something different, but Astrid couldn't really explain that part. So he knows Hiccup killed the Queen of Dragons and saved Berk. But that's about it. I think it's best to avoid mentioning any timelines or dates to be safe. Gobber nodded, but Astrid saw something in his expression shift, and he looked at Astrid skeptically. You said Hiccup told you to send me. Yeah. Ah, he said, nodding as if this confirmed something. Wait, why? What does that mean? Ah, you know Hiccup and his plans, Gobber answered evasively, finally standing up and starting to look around the forge. He's always thinking of 12 things at once. Gobber rolled up some paper and grabbed a couple of pencils. Blankets and food, you said. There's a well up there, right? Astrid nodded, still a little confused over what had just happened. Yeah, though we haven't checked its quality and it's been some time. Bah, should be fine. What do you mean Hiccup and his plans? Oh, you know, he probably just wanted reinforcements. Gobber started moving through his cabinets, frowning at what he saw. Haven't much food here. I'll need to go to the hall. That's fine. Reinforcements for what? Definitely haven't blankets here. Too hot in the forge for blankets. Gobber, Astrid nearly shouted, purposefully stepping in his way. Why would Hiccup need reinforcements? Are you asking as my general, Miss Horferson? Gobber asked shrewdly. Matching his tone, she asked, do I need to? Gobber waved her off, tension leaking from his body. You know how those two were back then. Being alone together could get difficult for them both. They lived alone together. Gobber held up a finger like she'd put it together. Exactly. No, not exactly. So, what? They couldn't stand each other. Things were bad between them at times, I know that, but Hiccup loved his father and Stoic loved his son. Nodding slowly, Gobber agreed. Yes. Hiccup loved his father and Stoic loved his son. Both of them tried their best to understand the other. But at times, Hiccup may not have always loved Stoic, and Stoic may not have always loved Hiccup. Astrid shook her head. That makes no sense. You just said their relationship was complicated, lass. Sometimes, I could help uncomplicate it. That's all. I understood Hiccup a little more than Stoic did, and I most certainly understood Stoic far more than Hiccup did. Why do you think Hiccup started working with me in the forge in the first place? Fishbone such as him. I never thought he'd move past sharpening butter knives. But it gave him something to do, something to tire out that small body and big mind of his. Maybe even a bit of a purpose, too. But more than anything, it just gave him a place to go. A place, away from Stoic. Gobber sighed. Away from a lot of things. Astrid didn't like thinking about the before times. Thinking about them meant thinking about seeing dragons as the enemy, fantasizing over spilling their blood. She knew it had been war, that dragons and Vikings had both been victims of a vicious cycle only Hiccup had been able to break, but it was still hard. Besides, back then, being tough had been all that had mattered to her. She hadn't wanted friends. She most certainly hadn't wanted a husband. She had only wanted to be a warrior, one that was revered and admired for her skill. And now Astrid had all of that. Friends. A man she loved who would eventually be her husband. When they got around to it, that was. And she was general of Berk's army and the most fearsome dragonback warrior on the island. So thinking about her old self. It just made her sad, mostly. But thinking about Hiccup. About how she had thought of and treated him. It made her feel something a whole lot worse. She knew she wasn't as bad as Snotlout or the twins, she hadn't gone out of her way to be cruel to Hiccup, but she hadn't been kind to him either. Not in the slightest. She'd rebuffed and rebuked him at every stage, and when he entered dragon training she hadn't attempted to hide her opinion, or her wrath when he started beating her. Hiccup had been alone and isolated amongst his own people, and thinking about whatever part Astrid had ever played into that made her sick. Gobber seemed to know what Astrid was thinking and put his non-tool hand on her shoulder. Things are better now. For Hiccup, and for everyone. That's good, and I know Hiccup wouldn't trade any of it for fear of losing what he has now. But, it's just probably a sore reminder for him. Especially when he's still missing the father he did love, uncomplicatedly. Do you think Stoic really changed that much after everything? Astrid asked softly. Gobber took a moment to consider the question, doing a final gather-up of what supplies he had found for the haddocks within the forge. I think, at all times, Stoic was exactly the chief Berk needed him to be. And while he might have initially reacted poorly to Hiccup's dragon revelation, most Vikings in his place at that time would have simply banished the boy and been done with it, holding tradition and history in the highest esteem. But not Stoic. He always wanted just what was best for his people. But Astrid prompted. But Gobber relented. It's possible, especially when Hiccup was young, that Stoic knew far more about being a chief than being a father. That didn't mean he didn't try. Gobber was quick to defend. He tried so hard. But he just didn't understand until we all did. Until Hiccup showed us what we were missing. In no small part because of your contributions, lass. Thanks, Astrid muttered, though she meant it. She just. The whole situation was impossible to believe, but it should be good, right? Complicated, but good. Chief Stoic, Hiccup's father, was back. But maybe it wasn't as good as she thought. Maybe it really was just complicated. Notes. I figure I will at least do a one in, one out policy. AKA you get a new chapter as I write a new chapter. Even though I'm posting chapter 3, I just finished writing chapter 6. This will give me a buffer in case I slow down or get distracted. Past that, posting will be based on vibes, so you keep the good ones coming, and so will I asterisk. Asterisk good for us. Hiccup's having a bad time. Sad smiley. Chapter 4, Chapter 4. Notes. Another chapter in one day. You are spoiled. Or rather, I have no self-control. Well, I realized the next one I had to write, CH7, was able to become one of the pivotal scenes I decided to write this story for and got excited. So, with the one in, one out policy, another chapter written for me, another posted for you. The seeds of the scene I was excited by are planted in this chapter as well, so that works out well. Anyways, this is another big chapter for imagining Hiccup's childhood on Berk when everyone hated their only heir. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Hiccup wasn't sure he'd ever had less of an idea of what to say. Well, okay, maybe that wasn't true. He frequently had no idea what to say. The thing was that just rarely stopped him from saying something. Anything. In fact, the less idea he had of what to say, generally, the more he said. But this time Hiccup had come in, arms full of firewood, and got directly to setting the fireplace to rights. His father grumbled and mumbled until he eventually took over and did exactly what Hiccup had been doing, but then at least they had a fire. Yeah. So then Hiccup asked about the dragon, and Hiccup asked a lot about the dragon. Problem was, Stoic didn't know much, and when it came to dragons, they didn't exactly speak the same language. So Hiccup really only knew the dragon was fast, but not Speed Stinger fast, bigger than Toothless but smaller than Hook Fang, not that Stoic would know those measurements. The dragon was more slender than Broad, and teeth were not that much of a threat. It didn't take a shot at him, so they didn't know its firepower or shot limit. And what did it look like? It was yellow. Right. Hiccup and Stoic both seemed to be waiting for the other to continue. And 4 wings. Right. And I already told you about the teeth. So, yeah, Hiccup wasn't getting much in the way of description. The only bit of valuable info Hiccup may have gotten was that Stoic hadn't been snatched during a dragon raid like he had assumed. There'd been reports of more animal carcasses, but no dragon sightings yet. Figured I'd take a look myself. And that's when you saw the dragon. What was it doing? It was by a riverbend. Must have been quenching its thirst. For it. And then what happened? I attacked, of course. Hiccup frowned. You attacked it. It didn't attack you. I didn't give it a chance. Stoic declared triumphantly. Had it running scared? It ran away from you. Tried to, but oh, I was quicker. Leapt at it and grabbed on tight and, well, you know the rest. Hiccup was putting a few pieces together and getting a better picture at what dragon behavior they may be dealing with, but asked his dad to confirm where he had spotted the dragon. Without a map between them, it took a few moments to be confident they were both describing the right riverbend, but if Hiccup was right then the location was secluded. Away from people. And the dragon hadn't attacked. Well, at least we can be reasonably sure it won't attack Burke. Reasonably sure? Is that a risk you're willing to take? His father demanded. Hiccup rolled his eyes, already well past his patience with this old gusto. No. Obviously. Astrid will have our reserve team on the lookout and beginning plans to track the dragon with fish legs come morning, but from everything you've told me it sounds like this isn't an aggressive species. Isn't aggressive, it's a dragon. And it pulled me through time. After you, Hiccup cut himself off with a frustrated grunt. It doesn't matter. Well, it does, for tracking. But this, Hiccup said, gesturing between them and the rapidly mounting pointless argument, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, Stoic scoffed. Tell me, if we're not worried about this unaggressive dragon, he began, making the phrase sound like an inherent contradiction, but Hiccup met his stare evenly and tiredly. What about the others? If I can't be with Burke right now, shouldn't you be down with the tribe? Oh. Okay. Right. Hiccup had forgotten how jittery nightfall had always made his father. Which, of course it did. Each nightfall had equal opportunity to bring war and death upon his people. So Stoic was fighting off his need to go be a hero to his people, and in turn was annoyed and disappointed that Hiccup didn't seem to be fighting the same instinct. I would love for a dragon to attack us right now, Hiccup thought. It would make everything worse, but it would also make this conversation shorter, and that might be a worthwhile trade-off. Everything's fine, Dad. You're certain? Pretty certain, yeah. Pretty certain. Feeling 15 again, Hiccup made a big show of rolling his eyes and told him, yeah, I am. Dragons haven't attacked Burke in years, and if anyone needs anything, Astrid can handle it. She's been my backup plenty before and the people are used to it. So, yes, for one night I am pretty certain everything will be fine, and if not they can find Astrid who, if really needed, knows how to find me. Distracted as he was by his irritation, he hadn't even noticed Stoic stumble backwards. Dragons haven't. What do you mean dragons haven't attacked Burke in years? Or, hell. Cringing, Hiccup took a page out of Astrid's book and kept it mostly to the truth. Yeah. Astrid told you how I, slayed the Queen of Dragons, he said, slayed feeling like a dirty word in his mouth. Apparently that was the, squeaky wheel. Took care of her, ended the war, yada yada yada. His father stared at him gobsmacked. What? How? Where? How can I? Whoa, Hiccup rushed to say, his hands up to calm Stoic as the large man began charging towards him. It's like Astrid said. We don't know how this all works. Predictably, his father was singularly focused. But you know how to end the war. It's not that simple. Maybe not the first time around, but you can tell me. No, I can't. We could save our people years of suffering. Or we could take away the peace forever. Hiccup shouted, needing volume just to get his dad to actually hear his words. You don't know what would happen, and more importantly you don't know what did happen. What almost happened. Because I do. And it was really bad and really scary. Scary. Stoic interrupted and Hiccup groaned, forgetting how infrequently he had once been able to finish sentences. You think I should be afraid? No proper Viking is afraid of dragons or of dying. If we have a chance to end the war, we can save lives, son. Even more so than before. Hiccup pointedly waited for him to be done, then said, yeah, I know you're not afraid. That was basically the entire problem the first go around. I told you that you didn't stand a chance, You ignored me and took every able-bodied man and woman in Birkin to a doomed battle, and if it weren't for me all of you would be dead and our tribe non-existent. Have any questions? No, you don't. Hiccup interrupted before Stoic could speak, because I can't answer any. Or won't. Trust me, that perfect storm of stupidity, on both our parts, to be clear, can't just be manufactured. You were dumb to not listen to me. I was dumb to go after you. So there is no outsmarting history, okay? I can't tell you anymore. I just... What? His father asked when Hiccup stopped talking suddenly with nothing more than a bitter laugh. Hiccup looked his dad in his eyes and said, I need you to trust me. And when Stoic's eyes narrowed before looking away disgruntled, Hiccup nodded to himself. Yeah, he said quietly. Thought so. And that had been maybe half an hour ago. Since then, Hiccup and Stoic had more or less begun quietly setting the old, abandoned home to rights as much as they could. It was domestic work and briefly Hiccup wondered if any of their tribe would be surprised to see them like this. Well, probably not Hiccup. No one was ever surprised when Hiccup acted non-traditionally, but Stoic. Stoic was the epitome of old Viking values, but he had also been a single father. When Hiccup was young, it had been Stoic who had kept their home clean and kept Hiccup fed. Maybe not always perfectly, but he tried and he taught Hiccup, and when Hiccup was old enough to do it himself, he did what he could to help his dad. Unfortunately, for a long time, that had seemed like the limit of his usefulness. Hiccup cringed. That word hadn't bothered him for so long, and now. If I can't ask about the dragons, Stoic spoke up suddenly as he tried to wipe down the small dirty table with a rag that seemed just as dirty. Am I able to ask about Astrid? Hiccup turned from his place at the kitchen hearth, cleaning out the old tinders and leftover muck so they'd be able to cook once they had food. Which would hopefully be soon, because Hiccup hadn't eaten since, long enough that Astrid would be mad at him. Speaking of, what about her? Well, less about her and more about the two of you. It was annoying that even now Hiccup blushed at Stoic's insinuation, which clearly went noticed by his father, who laughed in amusement. I just mean, is there a question of impugned honor, or are you two? No. Yes. I mean, Hiccup shook his head and, reluctantly clarified, we're betrothed. And everyone knows about us and we're getting married. Or we will, you know. We've just been so busy, and apparently when you're chief there are an insane number of traditions and you won't be there. Hiccup sighed. We'll get around to the ceremony. We just haven't yet. Stoic nodded, considering. Well done, son. That's a smart match. And, oh, that made Hiccup's blood go cold. Maybe it was an innocent comment, a compliment even, but Hiccup knew his father and he remembered what it had been like being 14, the heir to a tribe that had no faith in him. That openly and actively disliked him. Meanwhile, Astrid had been the perfect Viking warrior and a leader in the making. Everyone could see she had potential. General had always seemed so much more Astrid's destiny than Chief had ever seemed to be Hiccup's, and his was a title by birthright. Fuck, even Hiccup himself had idolized her when they were kids, a petty infatuation that didn't hold a candle to how he felt about her now. It had been clear to everyone, Astrid was their future. Hiccup was merely an obstacle. So? Yeah. He had heard the whispers. The rumors. The what-ifs. The he-shoulds. The contingency plan. Well, if the heir isn't much of a Viking, his father should at least make sure he has a Viking wife. It would be a smart match. He and Astrid had never talked about it. He didn't even know if she had heard the whispers, though he couldn't imagine she hadn't. He had never wanted to know if she had been flattered or disgusted at the idea of being married to him and puppeting his chiefdom. He wasn't even sure which option he would prefer, because it's not like he wanted Astrid to covet his title. Well, actually, some days it would be nice if she coveted it a bit more, so then he didn't have to do it as much, but he didn't want her to be so disgusted with the idea too. Hiccup forced himself to take a deep breath. It didn't matter. None of it mattered. He was secure in his present relationship in Astrid. She loved him, the real him. He knew that without hesitation or doubt. In fact, it was one of the few things he was absolutely confident about. Not that he always had been, Astrid had spent more time than he would like to admit in the early days of their relationship unraveling his self-doubting tendencies, but she was tenacious and determined and, as per usual, victorious. All that to say, he didn't doubt his relationship now. And there was no reason to fret over their non-existent relationship from 7 years ago and what might have been in an alternate reality where everyone still hated him and his people were still at war with dragons. No point whatsoever. So why was he so angry, then? I'm going to go grab some more firewood, Hiccup said in lieu of actually addressing Stoic's comments. If Stoic noticed Hiccup's turmoil and hurt. He didn't. He just didn't. Back then, he never did. Hash hash hash. His father definitely thought Hiccup was bad at tending to a fire with how long Hiccup had been poking at it, but really it was just the best thing Hiccup could think of to keep him busy and away from having to look at his father. How much longer until Gobber came and rescued him? Finally, Hiccup was pretty sure he was pressing his luck with the fire and reluctantly stood, only to nearly startle backwards into the fire when he turned around and realized his dad was standing right there. You nearly gave me a heart attack. Hiccup accused. What are you doing? Checking to see if you needed help with the fire. Stoic glanced around Hiccup to the roaring blaze. Doesn't seem like it. Yeah, well, Hiccup muttered, not sure what else to say, and moved around his father to find something else to keep him occupied. For a moment Stoic was quiet, though Hiccup could feel his father's eyes follow him. Finally, the man asked, how long has it been? Hiccup tested the sturdiness of the singular dining chair. It was a bit rickety, and it looked like a loose screw that Hiccup could fix easily if he had any tools. How long since what? Hiccup asked distractedly. He bent down to get a better look at the problem. How long has it been since I died? Hiccup jerked, his head slamming against the tabletop. What? Who? I never. He rubbed his head as his father only looked at him seriously. What are you talking about? I would guess more than 6 months but less than 2 years. It had been just over a year. Hiccup swallowed thickly and couldn't even stammer out a denial. Stoic nodded as if this was all the confirmation he needed. I remember that time period well. You can bear the grief well enough as long as you don't think about it, and so you do everything you can not to think about it. Son, you've barely looked me in the eyes tonight. And when you have, it's typically when we've been arguing. Of course he couldn't look the man in the eyes, outside of arguing, which was more out of habit than anything because his father never took him seriously if Hiccup couldn't meet his eyes. This man was the worst version of his father who knew only the worst version of Hiccup. Meanwhile, Hiccup was still in a shaky place when it came to mourning who his father had become, a man Hiccup relied upon and trusted deeply. A man Hiccup missed in his soul and his bones. And, of course, there was the fact that it was basically Hiccup's fault his dad was dead. Is that when you became chief? And there it was. The reminder of who this man wasn't. The insinuation that the only reason Hiccup had the title was because he was the only son of a dead man. Like everything else Hiccup had told Stoic that night, he told him a truth that was barely half of the story. Through grit teeth, and feeling like his heart was about to burst through his rib cage, Hiccup answered, yes. Before Hiccup could even begin to recover, or try to figure out how to explain that Stoic had wanted nothing more than to see his son as chief before he died, the door to Mildew's crashed open. Hiccup jumped worse than he had at his father's question, but felt immediate relief when he realized who it was. Gobber! Stoic cried out, grinning widely. Chief Stoic Gobber greeted, equally delighted. The two embraced, a hard, but fast collision, before separating just far enough for Gobber to hold Stoic at arm's distance. I believed Astrid when she told me, but I wasn't sure I believed it until now. I wouldn't have blamed you for calling her an outright liar. Gobber laughed. Trust me, you do not want to run the risk of calling Astrid Horfusson a liar. Especially when she's got her axe. Dragon. Gobber's eyes flickered over to Hiccup, who had leaned against the small table. Hiccup gave the smith a tense smile and saw him nod minutely in return. Well, Gobber said loudly to the room, raising the bag he'd had slung over one shoulder, I've got enough supplies here to at least get us through the night. And, Gobber dug around in the bag before producing some sheets of paper wrapped around a pencil. Astrid wanted me to make sure you got these. Hiccup nodded gratefully before slipping them into his pockets. Thanks. She also told me if you don't eat anything she'll, well, let's just say I recommend eating. Good of her, trying to get some meat on his bones. Trust me, I've tried. Stoic laughed. Gobber awkwardly laughed along and Hiccup just stood there. Right, well, we've got plenty to eat, but I wasn't sure about water. Hiccup, would you mind helping me check the well? Really, if you all must go talk secrets without me you don't need to lie. Stoic grumbled, though he did look a bit miffed. Go. Have your secret chat outside. Hiccup didn't wait for further preamble and marched outside. He heard Gobber making a more polite exit before following him. Hiccup was charging towards the well. They really did need to check it, but found a rusty old bucket along the way and kicked it as hard as he could. Unfortunately he kicked it with the foot that could still feel pain. Gods, fuck, Hiccup muttered. Lad. I'm fine, Gobber. Hiccup shouted at him. Gobber raised an eyebrow. You look it, too. Hiccup rolled his eyes. I forgot how much he groaned, motioning with his hands towards Mildew's house like he could choke his father from here. You know your father? No. Or you know what? Yes. Yes, I do know my father. And that man, Hiccup jabbed a finger roughly back towards the house, is not him. That man is just an older version of your father. Gobber supplied while Hiccup scrambled. Or, younger, I suppose. When he died, my dad respected me. He trusted me. He listened to me. Gobber looked at him doubtfully and Hiccup conceded, more than he didn't, at least. And he understood me. More than he didn't. My father wanted nothing more than to live to see me become chief, and the only reason he didn't get to is because Hiccup choked on all the ways he could end that sentence. I didn't want to. I kept putting it off. I started that war with Drago. I got him killed. Suddenly it felt like all of Hiccup's fury was gone. He was never good at holding on to rage, but the suffocating grief that he had been fending off rushed in to fill the void. Astrid told him I killed the Queen of Dragons and saved Berk, and he still thinks the only reason I'm chief is because there was no one else. Hiccup laughed lightly and bitterly as he added, and he thinks the only reason I'm betrothed to Astrid is because Berk wanted someone else. You don't know that, son. Hiccup looked at him dryly. He called us a smart match. Well, that could mean. You know what he meant by that, Gobber. You know what he would have meant by that 7 years ago. Gobber didn't respond for a moment, which was answer enough for Hiccup. Astrid said that if anyone asks, you're having a fly night. Yeah. Maybe you should go have one then. Hiccup's eyes darted to Toothless in the brush, the dragon's eyes instantly widening in anticipation. Astrid says I should stay with my father. Astrid says that someone needs to stay with your father. Things are complicated between you two. I get it. But me. That's my old friend, Hiccup. I wouldn't mind being able to catch up with him. You can't catch up with him, though. Unlike you, my life doesn't entirely revolve around dragons. I've got plenty of stories to share that won't give away anything important. We shouldn't really be telling him anything. I'm sorry, haven't you and the missus already told him about the Red Death, saving Berk, and being betrothed? Also, did I mishear you earlier, or does he know he's dead? That, I didn't tell him anything. He guessed. He said he could tell or something. Hiccup scoffed. Gobber just looked at him like Hiccup should be smarter than this and said, go have a fly. For Thor's sake, go take your dragon on a fly. He's somehow worse at being stealthy than you are. Come back in the morning and we will all figure out what to do. Yeah, we'll just need to find and trap a dragon we know nothing about, somehow train it to take my dad back to his time, somehow get my dad on board with this plan that relies on him trusting and not killing a dragon, all while trying to tell him next to nothing about Berk these days, but most specifically about how we don't kill dragons anymore. No big deal. Gobber shrugged. We've handled worse. Have we? I might have an idea about that last part if it helps. I'll need to speak with Gothai, but there's an old herbal pain remedy we stopped using decades ago. Had funny effects on the memory. Easily took a clean week from each soldier. A week. Hiccup considered the proposal. It meant that anything Stoic learned inside of a week could be erased, but that wouldn't give us much time. You hoping to drag this out? No, but we know nothing about this dragon. Can we up the dosage, do you think? I'm not even sure we have any of that old stuff still around. We can ask, Hiccup, but it was strong stuff. I doubt it. It's possible it could take away more than a week of his memory. I heard a man once lost a month to it, but a week is all that is guaranteed. Okay. A week. A week to find a dragon we know nothing about, train a dragon we know nothing about, figure out how to make the dragon. Go fly, Hiccup. Gobber said, lightly shoving him towards his dragon. We can do all your usual thinking and worrying tomorrow. Yep, Hiccup readily agreed, already heading towards Toothless. Instead of bounding forward, Toothless slunk towards him, his head low. Grief and guilt and worry radiated off his dragon, and Hiccup wondered if this was what his dad saw in him. He put a gentle hand on his dragon's head, and Toothless closed his eyes, leaning into Hiccup's touch as he shifted to scratch under his chin. When Toothless reopened his eyes, Hiccup was kneeling down to eye level. It wasn't your fault, Hiccup reminded Toothless. It was Drago's. And Drago was my fault. Toothless nudged his snout against Hiccup like he knew what his rider was thinking and wanted to tell him the same. It wasn't your fault. Hiccup stood up and turned to find Gobber still watching him. If my father asks about me, I'll tell him something chiefy came up. I told him Astrid was covering for me so he might not believe it, but anyways that's not what I meant. I meant, if he, asks about me, then I'll tell him the truth, Gobber said, in his own unique tone of sage wisdom. Which, if you must know, is that you are a chief I am proud to serve. A chief he would be very proud to see. Hiccup cleared his suddenly sore throat. Thanks, Gobber. Returning his attention to his dragon, he told Toothless, I think I've got some energy to burn after tonight. How about you, bud? Now Toothless twisted, lining himself up so that Hiccup could easily hop on. The Night Fury's wings were extended and taking off before Hiccup could even say, let's go. Notes. Thank you to my earlier commenters. You have brought me such sunlight and excitement to continue. Happy Smiley. I'm thinking the story will be either side of 10 chapters. Depending on how much the Time Flyer stuff happens on screen and how much it's just an off-screen plot device, lol. We'll see. I still have some key scenes I'm excited to write, I just gotta connect them. Chapter 5, Chapter 5. Notes. Yeah, these comments are making my heart sing and very much encouraging me to continue. It's taking a lot of willpower to keep my buffer of chapters I have pre-written because you guys send me excited comments and then I get excited to share, but it's good motivation for me to keep writing. Anyways, Chapter 8 written today, so Chapter 5 gets posted. Enjoy some Hickstrid feels in this one, friends. Astrid POV. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. When Astrid landed, the only sign that Hiccup had heard her was the stilling of his pencil. She slipped off Stormfly slowly, as if any noise could disturb the silent peace found on the sea stack. Even Toothless, who normally would rush to greet Stormfly, remained curled around his rider, his head resting at Hiccup's side. Though the dragon's wide eyes tracked Astrid's movement. For a moment, Astrid was somewhere else, a ruined island rather than a quiet sea stack, Toothless curled around Hiccup, protecting his rider the only way he knew how. Astrid blinked and the vision went away. Besides, it wasn't so similar. Toothless wasn't clutching onto Hiccup to save him from fire, but merely curled up on the ground while Hiccup sat in the middle of him with Toothless' midsection behind him and his half-mechanized tail landing near his toes. Astrid pet Stormfly, who was looking at her friend quizzically. It's okay, girl. Toothless just isn't feeling very well. Give us a few minutes. Stormfly stepped back, though there wasn't far for her to go without flying. Like Toothless, Stormfly watched her rider carefully as she sat down and tried to make herself comfortable as she waited. Still Hiccup hadn't spoke up as Astrid approached, seeing the sketch of the dragon in his hands over his shoulder. Is that it? She asked. The Time Flyer. Hiccup nodded. Best I can remember. I didn't get a good look at it. I have some other drafts that maybe we should have my dad look at." Even at the mention of his father, Hiccup frowned. Astrid started to walk around Toothless only for the dragon to shuffle his tail so that there was enough room for her to sit next to Hiccup. She gave his tail an appreciative pat as she sat down. Toothless always knew what Hiccup needed, sometimes even better than she did. As she sat down, Hiccup sighed in concession. "How did you find me?" "Well, that's a dumb question because I can always find you," she teased lightly, nudging his shoulder with her own, but when he didn't react past a weak half-smile, she said more seriously, "But I almost didn't think to. After I talked to Gobber, I did a quick fly around the forest, to see if I could find the dragon, but no luck. We'll probably have better luck in the daylight, though. Anyways, then I found Fishlegs and Snotlout and warned them that tomorrow we'd be dragon tracking and to be ready to go bright and early. I told Fishlegs what you'd told me about the dragon, besides the time flying, that is. Maybe he'll sleep on it and get some ideas. Then I went and lied to your mom. So that was great. And after all of that I went home and I lied in bed thinking about how I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing you were." Astrid shook her head and studied the love of her life beside her. He wasn't looking at her, fussing with the shading on one of the wings in his sketch. "Why don't we ever talk about how things were before?" "Because they were bad," Hiccup answered simply, eyes still on his sketch. "They were bad for me and they were bad for Berk. No one likes talking about it. I didn't realize how tense things used to be between you and your dad." "Yeah, well," Hiccup's hand stilled as he bit his tongue, finally glancing at Astrid in remorse. "Say it," she said gently. Hiccup was always reluctant to just say what he meant in tough conversations like this, and Astrid had learned his coping mechanisms and how to maneuver around them. He often used sarcasm, both a tool to cut down his opponent and deflect from his own pain, but when he censored his words it was because he was afraid of hurting someone else. Like he still thought if he said one wrong thing, then the people he cared about would leave him. It was an old reflex, one that didn't rear its head often anymore, and she didn't like it showing up now. Thankfully, Hiccup understood what she was doing, what he was doing, and put down his sketch materials with nothing more than a light huff. He met her eyes fully this time. "How well did you really know us back then, Astrid?" "I knew you first and best," she wanted to argue. "I was there beside you when you changed everything." But they had been 15 when that happened. Before that, Stoic was their great chief who could do no wrong. The man who protected and led their people to safety in their war against the dragons. He was the exact sort of warrior Astrid wanted to be, deadly and fearless and so often victorious. And Hiccup had been. Hiccup. Small and weak and in the way. She knew what the others called him. She didn't think the word had ever left her lips, but she couldn't say for certain, and she certainly never defended him or deterred them. Maybe they had always been two different entities in her brain. Had she ever really thought about what the two were like together in their shared home? The only time she seemed to see the two together when they were kids was when the chief was berating his son. Shouldn't Hiccup have been eating at his table during the evening meal? Now that Astrid was betrothed to a chief, she was so much more aware of the normal customs, especially since everyone loved telling her what customs she would one day share with their future children. Hiccup was their only heir. He should have been treated with honor, at the very least from his father, who should have felt bound by customs if not familial love. "I'm sorry," Astrid told the lonely boy who had grown into their beloved leader. Hiccup looked at her softly. "It's okay." "It's not, though." "It wasn't okay then either. We should talk about it more. I didn't realize how much you were still carrying this around until I talked to Gobber. I mentioned you had requested him and he knew almost instantly what that meant when I didn't." Pulling his knees to his chest, Hiccup asked, "Do we need to talk about it tonight?" She carded a hand through his hair. "No. I'm okay with not tonight. But sometime soon. And for the record, I haven't been," his hands flailed in front of him, "carrying this around. I've just been ignoring it." For a moment it looked like he wanted to argue, but then said, "Yeah, probably. But it's been easy to. Things were just so good for so long. And maybe not always, you know, good, but," more hand flailing as he scrambled. Not self-censoring, just struggling to find the right words. But they were good for you, Astrid supplied. Compared to before. People respected you. You had friends. Toothless. My father, Hiccup added, nodding along. Before everything with Toothless, we weren't close. I know he wanted to be, he just didn't know how to be, and neither did I. He felt like he didn't understand me and I felt like I understood him fine, but I just couldn't be like him. And I tried. I mean, I did, not that it ever looked like it. But it became pretty apparent that I wasn't about to be some axe or sword-wielding dragon-killing warrior, but, you know, I could smith and tinker and thought, well, maybe if I could still do the dragon-killing, just my own way, then at least. Toothless hummed mournfully and Hiccup started patting his head without looking, like it was a reflexive action. That's why you made the bowler launcher. The one that shot down, Toothless, yeah. Hiccup's lips twitched like he was trying to keep himself from laughing. Imagine my excitement when I realized I actually shot down a Night Fury. That I could drag its head to my father as a prize and get everything I ever wanted. But you didn't. Couldn't. You said wouldn't that time. Wouldn't, he corrected without prompting. Ugh, fine, whatever. 300 years and I'm the first Viking that wouldn't kill a dragon. But you were still the first Viking to ride a dragon, she reminded him. You saved Berk. You saved your father. Everything is better because of who you were then. Whatever you think of that 15-year-old version of yourself, Hiccup, you were brave. I know, Hiccup answered, but his eyes were still sad as he answered, but he doesn't. And that shouldn't matter that much to me because for the last 7 years my father has known I'm brave. In fact, he spent most of it thinking I was reckless and probably wishing I was afraid a bit more often. But before the last 7 years, I spent 15 of them, not like that. Astrid twined one of his hands with hers and leaned against his shoulder. His head rested against hers right away. I'm sorry this is happening, but you're not going through it alone. Tomorrow all of the riders will be behind you. So will Gobber. And I think we should tell your mom. But tonight, you should get some sleep. Right, he agreed, but didn't move. Astrid reached up to gently pat his cheek, and then roughly shoved him off of her. Hiccup fell against his dragon, the two of them looking so equally betrayed that she disturbed the quiet peace it was almost funny. She even heard Stormfly squawking behind them. You heard me. You need to sleep. Hiccup groaned, his head falling back against his dragon. Toothless nudged his rider off of him and shook himself as he stood. Toothless knew better to defy Astrid when she insisted his rider needed to eat or sleep. Speaking of, we are going to go home, you're going to eat whatever I put in your hands, she insisted as she grabbed his arm and pulled him to standing, and then you are going to come to bed and you are going to sleep. Now standing, Hiccup stood mere inches from her, both of them staring into the other's eyes. Astrid was pretty sure she could hear his heart beating and it was fast. Hiccup nodded. Okay, he agreed reverently. Whatever you say, General. She placed a hand on his cheek and he leaned into it. Your general would appreciate it if her chief didn't make it so hard to take care of him. He chuckled lightly and this time it felt genuine. You know me. I like to make everything complicated. Needlessly she agreed and then kissed him gently. When they separated, she whispered, now get on your dragon before I shove you onto him. This time his laugh was loud, his head tilting back, and Astrid wondered if he knew he looked like his father when he did that. Hash hash hash. Astrid woke up alone. Not uncommon, but she had been hoping for something better. After all, it had been well past midnight by the time the two of them collapsed into bed. She quickly changed and was still braiding her hair back as she descended the stairs to find Snotlout and Fishlegs were already there. The former looked like he might be asleep, his head resting on his arms at their dining table, but Fishlegs noticed her arrival right away and startled nervously. Hiccup, meanwhile, had a map of Berk outstretched on the same table Snotlout was drooling on. What's this? Astrid asked, peeking out the window to confirm. Yep, it was barely past sunrise. Woke up early, Hiccup answered, his back to her. Felt rested and ready and decided to get a jump on today's work. The dragon crashed here, Hiccup pointed to a marked place on his map. And it looked like it headed north from there. Astrid agreed, having checked the crash site quickly last night, but Hiccup hadn't mentioned doing the same. "And you remember that from yesterday?" He asked distractedly. "Oh, Toothless and I flew by earlier this morning. The tracks disappear, so it's possible it circled back another direction, but we should at least start with north." "Earlier this morning?" Astrid asked, glaring at the night fury in the corner of the room who cowered at her stare. "It's barely morning now. And tell me, how early did he wake up the two of you?" Fishlegs looked nervous and Snotlout startled, but that might be because she slammed a mug down on the table to wake him up. "Not me, Hook Fang!" Snotlout shouted as he awoke. Then he blinked, noting. "Oh, it's just you, Astrid. Can you yell at your husband for waking us up even earlier than the arse crack of dawn? Believe it or not, most of us are sleeping then." Both Astrid and Hiccup had stopped correcting people when they called the other their husband or wife. Partly out of convenience, partly because it served them to not remind everyone that they were living as though married without any of the traditional ceremonies that made their behavior historically acceptable. Snotlout kept it up as an old tick from when he had used the terms to tease them. "Funny, I thought my betrothed would be sleeping too," Astrid accused with crossed arms. "How long have you been awake?" Hiccup put on a poor show of pretending to be focused on his map, his eyes repeatedly darting to Astrid. "Oh. You know." "Couldn't say." Snotlout could. "When he woke me up at 5 in the morning he said he had already been awake for 2 hours. Hiccup glared at Snotlout and Astrid glared at Hiccup. "That's barely any sleep at all." "It's one bad night," Hiccup defended, finally giving up the map pretense. "I'll be fine." "Oh. Should I start doing the math of how much you've slept this entire week?" Hiccup cringed. "Probably best for me if you didn't." "I'm sorry. I couldn't. And then I couldn't just lie there. I could have," Snotlout interrupted. "I was happy to be lying in my bed. Sound asleep, I was." Astrid tried to stay angry, but Hiccup was doing his big baby dragon eyes at her and they were more effective than she ever wanted him to know. Besides, after their talk last night, and everything that had transpired before, maybe she shouldn't be surprised. "What do they know?" she asked him. Hiccup shuffled awkwardly and Astrid knew immediately the answer was not the full story. "That we need to find the injured dragon. The problem is that we don't know much about it. We should start with Stormfly, since she's our best tracker," Fishlegs interjected, looking relieved that the conversation had moved away from Hiccup and Astrid spatting. "Probably smart," Astrid distractedly agreed with Fishlegs while staring down Hiccup. Hiccup turned away from her pointed stare and grabbed a few yellow scales that sat on the table. "I found these when I checked the crash site. I'm hoping they'll help Stormfly. Even if we just get any more insight on the dragon's behavior, that will help us figure out how we can trap the dragon." "Hiccup says it's not aggressive?" Fishlegs asked a bit more doubtfully. "That's what he was told," she said, her stare unrelenting. Now Snotlout's gaze turned skeptical. "Told? By who? I thought this dragon crashed in front of you in the middle of nowhere." Hiccup shrugged. "Yeah. It did." Fed up with evasiveness, and, quite frankly, exhausted from lack of sleep, Astrid yanked Hiccup back and made him look at her. She stepped close and spoke in a hushed voice, but couldn't guarantee the others didn't hear her. "You need to tell them." Hiccup looked nervously over his shoulder, then told her just as quietly, "They don't need to know about that. We have a dragon to track and trap. That's what matters." He pulled away and Astrid felt all of her frustration build up inside of her. He knew they handled these things together. All of them. But things were getting emotional for him and he didn't want to deal with that, and his evasion could put everything at risk. Lacing her words with every bit of commanding power she had, she told her chief, "I will not let you send my men into battle with limited information. You either need to tell them or pull them from this mission." Hiccup turned around slowly, eyes narrowed, knowing exactly what card she was pulling. "Your men, General." Snotlout and Fishlegs exchanged nervous glances. Hiccup and Astrid had always had, will always have, spats and arguments back and forth. But they knew from experience how nasty things could get when the General and their chief got involved. The Riders are defenders of Berk, are they not? If so, that makes them my soldiers, and my soldiers do not enter battles ill-prepared. So you'll tell them if I don't?" Hiccup sneered. "Of course not. As chief, you decide who knows what. As chief, I decide everything." Hiccup stormed forward, using his height to impress upon Astrid how much taller he was, a tactic learned since he couldn't otherwise make his appearance imposing. But he could often force his opponents to look up at him if need be. Astrid met his gaze levelly, her posture straight and her hands behind her back, the picture of the perfect general. Unintimidated. "As your second in command, might I suggest that your reasoning may be flawed? Influenced by emotions that do not serve you now. And if this is the case, then I will not let you put anyone else at risk." Hiccup continued to stare down at her and she could see his mask slipping, so she dropped hers first, gently telling him, "We need help, Hiccup. Don't keep your friends in the dark." His eyes closed and he took a deep breath, but Astrid knew she had won. He was simply bracing himself for something he didn't want to do. When he turned around, all the chief bravado was gone, but Hiccup had always been bad at holding on to it. At its core, it was almost always a sham. More often than not, Astrid knew that Hiccup felt like a boy playing pretend at chief, but in the early days there had been people calling Hiccup's bluff, Burkians, allies, and enemies alike, and so Hiccup had needed to learn how to throw around the weight of the title when needed. With his arms crossed, looking much more like the young man they all knew him to be, Hiccup told them, "This dragon seems to have the ability to fly through time. We know because it brought someone with it." Both Snotlout and Fishlegs stared at Hiccup with wide eyes. Snotlout recovered first, laughing, "Wait, you're messing with us, right? Did the twins put you up to this?" But it was clear Fishlegs saw the severity of Hiccup's expression. "Who?" For a moment, it looked like Hiccup physically struggled to say the words. Astrid stepped forward, a hand on Hiccup's arm. "His father. Chief Stoic. From before the war with dragons ended." Astrid saw the excitement in their eyes die as she finished her statement. "So that's bad, right?" Fishlegs asked. "Is it? Couldn't we tell him how to end it sooner? And about Elvin and Viggo and Johan? We could warn him about Dra." "No, we can't." Hiccup sharply cut him off. "We don't know how any of this works." "He's right," Astrid agreed. "What if we end the war sooner, but Hiccup doesn't meet Toothless? What would that mean for our dragons? For the people we've become?" Astrid saw Hiccup look away and knew that he must be thinking that if the glory of ending the war had gone to someone else, there was a chance his life would be very different now. "It's too risky. He can't know anything. We have him cooped up at Mildew's old place." Snotlout grimaced. "Ah, gross. And Gobber is watching him right now," Hiccup continued. "We might. Gobber thinks there's an old medication we used to use that could affect my dad's memory. It would buy us a week, so that anything he learns during that time could be erased, but we still shouldn't tell him any more than we absolutely have to." Fishlegs looked concerned. "Only a week to track a dragon we know nothing about and figure out how to make it fly?" Chief Stoic back to the past. "That's a tall order, Hiccup." "I know," Hiccup agreed, "which is why I'm not commanding you as your chief. I'm asking for help. Because Astrid's right, we need it. I need it." Astrid leaned up and kissed his cheek, proud of him for being able to say it. Then she looked at the others. "You heard your chief." Snotlout gestured to Hiccup. "He just said he wasn't commanding us as our chief." "Yes, but I'm your general, and I made no such promise." Fishlegs put a hand on Snotlout to cut off whatever argument he was about to make. "Of course we'll help. Where should we start?" Hiccup looked around the room, meeting each of their eyes and looking unbearably grateful and relieved. "Thank you. All of you. Seriously." And then Hiccup shook it off and stepped back towards the map. "So, like I said. Notes. More of the gang this chapter. I was actually really nervous to write characters outside of Hiccup, Astrid, and Stoic. Snotlout turned out to be a lot of fun to write and you'll see a lot more of him in coming chapters. My grasp of writing Fishlegs still feels a bit shaky, but hopefully he's passable." Chapter 6, Chapter 6. Notes. I'm nailing this chapter a day thing and it's making me nervous. But I will do my best to continue and thrive because I am having a lot of fun with this, but if I'm quiet for a day or two coming up, do not fret. I have several chapters already written ahead and lots of plans. Side note, I had a whole scene in this chapter around Hiccup having the strike class / toothless symbol on his shoulder, and thank goodness realized this morning that was just a RTTE design, so continuity saved, lol. More Snotlout content and even some twins content this chapter. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. It was decided that Fishlegs would go with Astrid to try to track down the dragon. Ideally, they would also see if they could learn anything about what the dragon ate or how it behaved as it moved. This would inform them of how to track the dragon and, if they were really lucky, maybe some hints on how to train it. Snotlout would go with Hiccup to brief his father, and Snotlout looked about as pleased with that decision as Hiccup felt, but Astrid wouldn't even let Snotlout begin to argue. Hiccup was tempted to argue himself, not entirely sure if having a buffer between him and his dad was worth enduring having Snotlout as a buffer between him and his dad. It could be fine. Probably. Maybe. Snotlout was always more of a proper Viking than Hiccup, just a bit too loud, maybe. The question of the twins got answered as a Terra mail landed on Hiccup's window perch. I reached out to Gothai about the medication Gobber mentioned. Astrid narrowed her eyes at him. And how early did you send this Terra mail? Hiccup cringed as he read the opening lines. Too early, it seems. Snotlout, reading over Hiccup's shoulder, laughed. Oh, man, I didn't know the old bat knew those words. Thor above, I'm not sure I knew those words. Hiccup shoved Snotlout away from him and continued to read the rest of the note. She agrees with Gobber that we shouldn't count on it erasing more than a week from my dad. The problem is that, since we don't use the herb anymore, we don't have it handy. In the old days, we had to rely on having a stockpile acquired from traders because to get there by boat would be too unwieldy if the medication was ever needed urgently. But on Dragon. Fishlegs prompted. Doable. Definitely doable. Maybe a day's flight away. Well, Astrid said, if you were looking for a way to keep the twins away from your father. That's what I was thinking, Hiccup agreed. Snotlout held up his hands in a hold-on gesture. You want to trust the twins with a vital and solo mission off Berk. Alone. Hiccup shoved the note in his pocket. They can handle it. Yeah, and if they can't, Astrid said, then we'll still have time to go fly out and get it ourselves. Hiccup gave her a dry, unimpressed look and Astrid met it shamelessly. Why don't you and Fishlegs go talk to the twins, make sure they know what they're looking for? Fishlegs frowned at Astrid splitting up their previously established teams. But Snotlout and I need to have a little chat first. Astrid smiled at Snotlout sweetly, who knew plenty well to take it as a threat and looked appropriately frightened. Hiccup was fairly confident that Astrid wanted to talk, threaten, Snotlout about Hiccup and his father, and briefly Hiccup was tempted to intervene, more on his own behalf than Snotlout's, but history has proven that, when determined, Astrid would not and could not be deterred. And Astrid was rarely more determined than when it came to anything about Hiccup. So, it was going to be what it was going to be. Hiccup could deal with it later. Okay. We'll meet back here at. How about we meet at the dining hall? Astrid interrupted, her sweet smile now locked on Hiccup. After all, by then the morning meal will be in full swing. Or would anyone in this room like to try to convince me that Hiccup has already eaten today? Fishlegs and Snotlout suddenly found the floor and ceiling very interesting. All right, Hiccup relented. Dining hall in 1 hour, okay. Astrid kissed his cheek as she walked past. Great idea, Chief. Then she grabbed Snotlout by the ear, dragging him outside and ignoring his complaints entirely. After all these years, should I still be this afraid of Astrid? Fishlegs asked once they were outside. I know I am. Hiccup gathered up his map. Come on. Explaining this to the twins is going to take a while. ###. We've been over this 1,000 times. Roughnut argued. Technically, only 3 times, Fishlegs countered. Toughnut's fist slammed on the table. Yeah, but we got it right the last time. Humor me, Hiccup asked. But your sense of humor sewer you ux, Roughnut complained. Yeah, you never find us funny. No, I didn't mean, just repeat the plan back to me again. As Rough Nut and Tough Nut fell into Snotlout's school of thinking when it came to sleep, just rousing them out of their home had been hard enough. Tough Nut had literally needed to be carried out. Hiccup and Fishlegs tried to brief them on the way to the dining hall with mixed results. At this point, Hiccup was confident they understood the gist: go get medicinal herb and bring it back quickly, but was still worried they were losing the details. Specifically the where to go and which herb details. So while Hiccup ate his Astrid-mandated breakfast, it was crazy how he didn't realize he was starving until he ate. He made the twins recite the instructions back to him over and over again. Meanwhile he made them 2 copies of the map and 4 copies of what the herb looked like, because he had long ago learned that backups were crucial when it came to the twins. If all went well, they should be able to reach the island by nightfall and find the herb in time to return before tomorrow's nightfall. And why do we need this crusty old herb, again? Tough Nut asked. It's medication that Gothai needs, Hiccup responded, a bit tense because he had answered the question for what seemed like the 1000th time, but maybe it had only been the 3rd. Why can't Gothai just use a different herb? Tough Nut pushed. Yeah, or get it herself, Rough Nut added. Hiccup raised an eyebrow. Would you two like to go ask her those questions yourselves? Also, Hiccup is your chief, Fishlegs added timidly, but that just caused Rough Nut and Tough Nut to start fake vomiting. Tough Nut raised a fist. I do not concede to his governmental authority. I could have you banished, Hiccup commented tiredly. Tough Nut's fist lowered and Rough Nut laughed nervously. On the other hand, she said. What was the errand again? Tough Nut asked more agreeably. Rough Nut slapped her brother's head. We're getting the stupid herb from the stupid island. Aren't you listening? Right, but hypothetically, let's say I wasn't and / or forgot already. And so they ran through it 5 more times. Honestly, Hiccup would have had them repeat it back another dozen times, but that was when Astrid appeared, dropping a bag of supplies in the middle of their conversation. There, she said. This should be enough supplies to last you 4 days. Hiccup said this should only take 2 days, Rough Nut argued. Hiccup has a lot more faith in you than I do. Tough Nut nodded. That's probably fair, he said as Astrid leaned down and took a bite of Hiccup's bread, which she would only ever do if she thought he had eaten enough. Considering Hiccup was working on his 2nd plate, he certainly hoped Astrid was satisfied. Otherwise she would just stare at him unblinkingly, watching him eat every single bite until his plate or bowl was empty. Sometimes, when he hadn't eaten well for a few days, her ex joined them at the table. Ready to go, Fishlegs? Hiccup frowned up at her. Did you two eat? Yep. Plus, I got snacks for the road, Fishlegs. Snotlout crossed his arms. Team Dragon tracking is looking way more enticing. You're not invited, Astrid said as Tough Nut cried out, wait, there are teams. Hiccup stood. Yes, there are, Tough Nut. And you and Rough are on the most important one, so, please, stay focused, don't get lost, and bring back the right herb. If you're not back in 4 days, we'll assume you've died, Snotlout added cheerfully. Hiccup glared at him. No. We won't. But, please come back sooner than that. Having to send out a search party for the twins would drastically dwindle their already limited resources. They could probably send out the A-team if it came down to it, but crazy as they were, the twins were part of their group. If something happened to them, Hiccup would want to be out there personally. Even if he was pissed off at them the whole time. You can trust us. Tough Nut promised, saluting. Yeah, we'll bring back the stupid flower, Rough Nut agreed, rolling her eyes. Well, it's an herb, so. Astrid lightly shoved Hiccup towards the door. I'll drill it into their skulls a few more times. Go. Okay. And while Hiccup and Astrid weren't much for public affection, especially in a place as public as the dining hall during meal times, Hiccup darted forward and pressed a quick kiss to her lips, trying to focus on that for 1 second rather than the idea of seeing his father again. Astrid didn't say anything when they separated, but he knew she understood. And despite the fact that Snotlout was making kissy faces and the twins were fake vomiting again, for that 1 second, Hiccup felt like everything would be okay. ###. So what did Astrid talk to you about? Hiccup asked as the two of them landed a safe distance from Mildew's house. Dude, what do you think? She threatened my life if I was mean to you in front of your dad. Oh, right. She shouldn't have done that. I'm fine. Snotlout stood in front of him, stopping Hiccup in his tracks. You're right. She shouldn't have done it, but not for the reason you're thinking of. Unlike the rest of those losers, I actually had to spend time with pre-toothless Hiccup and Stoic. Let me tell you, you guys were a bummer to be around. Hiccup rolled his eyes and pressed forward past Snotlout. Gee. Thanks. I'm Ian, I always liked Stoic. This isn't helping. But when we were kids I was never jealous of your relationship with him. Did always think he would have been a cool dad to me, though. Is any part of this meant to be comforting? Look, man, I get it, Snotlout said, and his tone made Hiccup stop and turn back around to find his cousin looking at him with some level of poorly hidden sincerity. He kind of sucked to you. I should know, my dad has always kind of sucked to me. Back then I was just glad someone else had it worse, but now. Snotlout sighed and shrugged his shoulders. No one should have had it worse, is what I'm saying. So I have your back in there. Like you have always had mine when my dad is around. For a moment, Hiccup didn't know what to say or even how to react. His and Snotlout's relationship might actually be the most complicated of the bunch. Sure, they were cousins, but that had been very far from making them friends. In fact, that had only seemed to put Snotlout's target on his back even more. Not only were the two of them occasionally put in forced proximity, Hiccup's pretty sure Stoic had been hoping Snotlout's surplus of Viking nature would rub off on him, but Hiccup had also been Snotlout's obstacle to maybe becoming chief himself. Of course, as adults, Snotlout would readily admit, when no one else was around to hear him, especially his father, that he would never want to be chief, that he's seen what Hiccup has had to deal with and has called it boring, lame and a lot of work. Furthermore, Burke hadn't been super psyched about the idea of Snotlout taking Hiccup's place as chief. But as a young kid desperate for his father's approval, one-upping the chief's son was an easy way to earn it. Lowering Hiccup's status among the tribe just made that even easier. So the two of them grew up next to each other, but frequently at odds and with little to no genuine knowledge of who the other was. To Snotlout, Hiccup had simply been weak. To Hiccup, Snotlout had simply been a brute. End of story. Then, like everything, things changed after Toothless and the Red Death. Now they were friends, a fact Hiccup would readily admit and Snotlout would reluctantly concede, except of course when it could curry him favor. Then Snotlout was quite quick to throw Hiccup's name around, a situation that had caused more than a few problems for said chief. And, okay, yeah. Maybe sometimes Hiccup saw Spitaloot being dickish to Snotlout and thought about how Stoic had made him feel when he was younger. And maybe, when they were young, Hiccup hadn't quite picked up on how often Spitaloot was a dick to Snotlout. Hiccup had only seen a father who was proud to identify his son in public. But Hiccup knew better now and, apparently, so did Snotlout. Okay. Thanks, Snotlout. Snotlout grimaced and punched Hiccup's arm roughly. No need to be such a girl about it. Come on. I'm going to tell Astrid you said that girl comment. Please don't. Hash hash hash. Snotlout. My boy, how you've grown. Stoic greeted cheerfully as they entered. Well, maybe not vertically, Gobber commented. Ah, there's other ways to grow, Stoic dismissed easily. I can tell by looking at you that you've grown into the warrior your father always hoped for. Snotlout locked eyes with Hiccup, who had walked around their merry little trio without commentary. Yeah, sure did, Snotlout boasted with a debatable level of veracity. To be fair, Spitaloot's opinion seemed to change like the weather, but he seemed to be generally satisfied with Snotlout's skills and stature, when he wasn't making comments about how he should be chief or general, that was. One of our best warriors, Hiccup added, throwing Snotlout a bone. Stoic startled like he hadn't realized Hiccup had entered. Busy morning, my son. You look tired. A chief should never show how tired he looks. The only direct response that Hiccup could manage was a tired blink, which certainly didn't help his cause. Skirting around it, he said instead, my friends and I, Stoic did a piss-poor job of not looking surprised when Hiccup mentioned friends, even if Hiccup had only used the word to avoid saying riders. We came up with a starting plan this morning. Hiccup did his best to walk them through it, crediting Gobber for the medication idea and promising he did trust the twins to retrieve the necessary herb. He also made a point to commend Astrid and Fishleg's tracking abilities, neglecting to mention Stormfly would be doing most of the work. His plan started to get real vague when the question of what to do after the dragon is trapped came up. The two dragon riders made uncomfortable eye contact. Hiccup proceeded cautiously, well, as far as we know, that dragon is the only way to get you back to your time, and we have no idea how devastating not getting you back to your time could be. So, we will need to find a way to, coerce the dragon to fly back to your time. And when it does so, you, need to be, with it. Stoic's eyes narrowed harshly. You want me to ride that dragon? PSH, what? Snotlout loudly interrupted. No way. That would be crazy. His interjection petered off as both Gobber and Hiccup stared at him. Ride probably isn't the way I would phrase it, Hiccup answered more delicately. Maybe it can grab you, or we can tie you to it, or, I don't know, Hiccup said, arms thrown up as his father's expression got more and more displeased with each option. But you need to be with that dragon when it flies through time, Dad. And I'm pretty certain the dragon can't be dead when that happens. Stoic crossed his arms. I don't like any of this. You cannot trust a dragon and you cannot make it do what you want. Maybe you can't, Snotlout started, and Hiccup's heart started racing. Snotlout, wait. But I think Mr. Dragon Master Hiccup had a can. He was going to kill him. Maybe that would earn his dad's respect, if he watched his son whip out his flame sword right now and strike Snotlout down where he stood. Stoic turned to his son incredulously. Dragon Master. Immediately, Hiccup grew uncomfortable. He hadn't really been called that in years, the term's height being the immediate aftermath of killing the Red Death. Uncertain rumors had swirled around the archipelago, and a lot of times people weren't willing to believe that a fishbone 15-year-old befriended a Night Fury, and so a different version was crafted. A version that painted Hiccup bigger and meaner, the Night Fury either dead at his feet or chained to his will. They had made him sound like Drago. As the truth took deeper root, or their reach extended past the limits of the Dragon Master whispers, the term had more or less died out. But once in a while, they would find a traveler or an island who had heard the old tale. Hiccup hated it then. He hated it now. And he definitely hated Snotlout. That is, an old epitaph based on misguided rumors. How do you think Hiccup killed the Queen of Dragons? Snotlout carried on, ignoring Hiccup entirely. Because he knows them, dragons. I mean, that's what Gobber taught us in dragon fighting, right? Gobber looked startled to be brought into this half-lie. He taught us about dragons so we could kill them better. Well, trust me, no one knows more about dragons than Hiccup. Stoic turned his back to Snotlout to stare at his son. Snotlout gave him 2 thumbs up where the old chief couldn't see, and Hiccup had to keep his glare to a minimum to not draw suspicion. Abandoning his son without any follow-up questions, Stoic instead asked Gobber, you said Hiccup did well in dragon fighting. Gobber, who had clearly also been trying to compliment Hiccup to his father, but with more tact, reluctantly agreed. Yes. First in his class actually. It's like Snotlout said. He had a way with the beasts. Yeah, because I was messing around with a Night Fury behind all of your backs, Hiccup wanted to shout. And it was maddening, watching you all think I was getting good at killing dragons while I was learning for a fact that I never would be. Stoic turned back to Hiccup, like he just couldn't make all these pieces of information he'd learned fit into the idea of his 14-year-old son. Hiccup suspected his father thought they were all lying to him. Which was kind of fair given Stoic's available information. Hiccup still hated it, though. You've killed dragons? Stoic asked skeptically. Up until then, they had gotten away with full truths that were half the story, but this. Hiccup laughed nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. Technically, he kind of killed the Queen of Dragons, but that was really it, and Stoic's question had a very purposeful plural to it. Unfortunately, it was Snotlout who decided to come to Hiccup's rescue. Killed dragons. PSH, this guy. He jabbed a thumb at Hiccup. Shot down his first dragon before any of us were even in training yet, and you won't believe what kind of dragon it was. Gobber and Hiccup both looked at each other in panic. Snotlout. Boy, we might not. A Night Fury, Snotlout answered, ignoring them and waving his hands with flair. Stoic froze. When he melted, it was to throw his head back and laugh heartily. Okay. You have got good friends here, Hiccup, but this is a bit outlandish even for you. Especially for you. No, I'm serious. Snotlout defended. A Night Fury Stoic repeated dryly. Yeah. Shot it down, right from the sky, using some contraption that I don't. Okay. Gobber interrupted, getting his head on straight quicker than Hiccup could. The younger Viking was still recovering from the feeling of panic that felt way too similar to how he'd felt when he'd seen Astrid in the cove that day. I think that's enough. We don't want to give away all the juicy details and risk Hiccup not, getting the glory of shooting down his first dragon. A Night Fury. Stoic repeated. Gobber, surely you're not saying this is true. I am very distinctly not saying anything about this other than we should stop talking about this. That last part directed pointedly and unsubtly at Snotlout. Fine. But the point is, Hiccup will be able to get this dragon to do what he wants because he's that good with dragons. And he'll get it done inside of the week. Won't you, Hiccup? In unison, the room turned to stare expectantly at Hiccup. For a flash of a moment, he felt 15 again and wanted to wilt and waver and crawl away from the attention. He wanted to laugh and tell his father that he knew it all sounded crazy. I mean, me. A master of dragons. We all know it's a miracle I haven't been swallowed whole by one yet. But Hiccup wasn't 15. He was 21 and chief of their village, and while he hated the idea of mastering dragons, Hiccup was quite arguably a leading expert of them. So Hiccup manhandled his spine straight and dragged his eyes to meet his father's. Right. I've got this, Dad. I know how to handle dragons. Notes. Okay, I was very nervous to write the twins, another reason I'm not sure how present they'll be in the story, but they were a lot of fun to write in this scene. I do not concede to his governmental authority gave me a good chuckle and felt like such a perfect tough nut line. We'll see how much they get integrated into the Stoic plotline though. And of course I cosign how we all just have decided Snotlout and Hiccup are cousins, which I believe is a book detail, if I recall, that we've all just taken into the movie/TV verse. So, anyways, thinking about what that dynamic was like was also very fun to ponder. And their modern dynamic is so fun, like bickering brothers. Chapter 7. Notes. Okay, I am using one of my banked chapters because I'm not sure I'll get to writing today or tomorrow, but your girl will be back Sunday. And this feels like a good one to leave you with, as this is one of the big chapters to me, one of the primary scenes that made me want to write this story and why I knew Astrid's POV would be heavily involved. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. It was well past midday when Astrid and Fishlegs entered Mildew's house. Astrid wasn't sure what had transpired that morning, but Hiccup's eyes lit up and even Snotlout looked relieved. Gobber must have departed at some point prior because she didn't see the smith anywhere, but Stoic grinned, greeting Astrid warmly and then turning his attention. Fishlegs. And here I thought you wouldn't be able to grow any more. Fishlegs laughed nervously. It's very good to see you, Chief. Any luck? Hiccup asked. Yes and no, Astrid answered, entering the abode fully and joining Hiccup in the main sitting area by the hearth. Though she made a point to stay standing at attention as she reported to her chief. We didn't catch sight of it, but we picked up its trail. I wouldn't consider it the most stealthy dragon, but we suspect that's further sign of its injury. Its path has kept it to the most remote parts of the forest, and any signs of skirmishes with other dragons tells us that they were brief and the time flyer fled. It's definitely a freshwater dragon. In short, it's a docile dragon and we laid down traps and bait and anticipate it'll be caught before tomorrow's daybreak. If not? Hiccup asked, and Astrid wasn't entirely sure if he was playing his part or was just extra concerned about thoroughness. Could be either. We'll readjust. If we don't catch it, that probably means that we've gauged its trajectory wrong. It circled back, Or, it's smarter than we think. We'll have to wait to see which it is. Hiccup frowned thoughtfully. Those traps will catch other dragons, he noted quietly, but Astrid knew not quiet enough to not be heard. The traps they used were as humane as possible, and wouldn't put any dragons at any further risk than a bit of discomfort. Probably some fear too, which was unfortunate, but unavoidable. Astrid chose her words carefully. That can be addressed tomorrow. We'll check them, Hiccup, and we'll set them free as soon as we can. Seeming to understand, Hiccup nodded, still looking worried but not arguing. Stoic took another meaning. The more the merrier, I say. Astrid smiled politely and turned to the room. If you all wouldn't mind, I need a moment with our chief. Hiccup, if you could step outside. Nodding, Hiccup stood to follow her. Stoic looked a little annoyed and grumbled about another secret meeting, but Snotlout clapped him on the back and assured him, they're always like this. At least this time I'm mostly sure it's not to just make out. In the last moment before stepping outside, Hiccup pulled a pencil from his pocket and chucked it at Snotlout's head. Aim had always been a better skill of Hiccup's than strength or agility, and so he actually got pretty close, forcing Snotlout to duck. After walking until they were the usual acceptable distance from the house, Astrid turned to Hiccup. So? How was everything? How was Snotlout? Hiccup's expression gave his answer away immediately. Oh, great. Except Snotlout told my dad that I'm a master of dragons whose first kill was when I shot down a Night Fury. Unfortunately for Snotlout, the Viking had just stepped outside to join them, perfectly timed for Astrid to notice him and shout, Snotlout. What the fuck? Snotlout jumped to slam the door behind him and hurry back over to them. Will you two shut up? They definitely heard that. Fury and maybe even a lick of terror filled her blood, the perfect recipe that told her body it was time for war. Oh, now, you're worried about Stoic hearing things he shouldn't. What? We're actually mad about that? Snotlout asked, looking between the two of them. Come on, Astrid, you basically threatened me that I better make Hiccup sound good. We both know how you were like whenever Stoic came to the edge, Snotlout, always trying to one-up Hiccup and show off to his dad. This isn't that Stoic, and this isn't about you. If you're a dick to him at all, then the next event that will be about you will be your funeral. Yeah, by saying how good of a chief he is, not that he shot down a Night Fury, you numbskull, she argued, shoving him roughly at the end. Hiccup jumped in between the middle of the two of them, always the peacemaker of their group. A born chief. Whoa, Astrid, he was trying to help me. Astrid jabbed a finger at Snotlout around Hiccup. War. Fight. Survive. He did a shit job of it. Snotlout put an offended hand to his chest. Excuse me. Hiccup conceded, maybe. Hey. But what's done is done. Astrid shook her head because Snotlout was still looking at her like she was crazy because he didn't get it. She shoved Hiccup's hands off of her and stepped closer to Snotlout, not enough to charge him but enough to make him briefly stumble back in fear. Do you remember what happened last time Hiccup told Burke he shot down a Night Fury? No one believed him. Right. Which meant that when Hiccup found Toothless, he was alone. Do you know what will happen if Stoic goes back to his time and remembers what you said and believes his son shot down a Night Fury? He will go with him. Or instead of him. Either way, Hiccup will not be in a position to set Toothless free, he will not bond with Toothless, and nothing that happened afterward will have happened. Do you understand how much you've fucked up? A firm hand on Astrid's shoulder had her whipping around so quickly her braid nearly slapped Hiccup in the face. He dodged it like a practiced action. It's okay, Astrid. You don't know that. Hiccup's lips pursed. We're still within our week. We still have time and we have a plan. Snotlout was just trying to help me. Besides, my dad probably already knows way more than he should. I mean, you told him about the Queen of Dragons. That's another thing that, as shitty as it sounds, we need him to not believe me about. He was right, and that shattered Astrid's heart. Everything great they had now relied on their younger selves having no faith in the boy who would save them all. She wanted to scream and cry and punch Snotlout and maybe even Stoic a little bit too. We're all guilty here, he continued. This is hard. We're trying our best. Snotlout included. Astrid took several deep breaths to calm her heart, to tell herself that she didn't need to be afraid, that she wasn't at war. She didn't need to be a warrior right then. But when she moved, it was almost like an attack, grabbing Hiccup and pressing her lips to his with much less grace than she would like to think she normally had. She vaguely registered Snotlout grumbling behind her, but she didn't care. This wasn't the quick peck in the dining hall earlier. This was rough and deep and desperate. She loved Hiccup. She loved him and she hated his past and she hated that they needed it. She hated that he had needed to suffer for them all to thrive. She hated that she hadn't realized how bad it was and how much Hiccup still carried that weight with him. She hated that he was grieving the best man he ever knew while suffering through the very worst version of his father. She hated so much of all of this, but she loved Hiccup. And that made everything worse. When she pulled away, she pressed her forehead against his and matched his breathing. Even picked up as it was after their kiss, it was still calmer than hers. Only once both their breathing were steady did she fully step away. Hiccup still looked a bit dazed, but far less tense, and Snotlout merely looked annoyed. I literally just said I was pretty sure you two weren't going to make out. We strike when you least expect it, Astrid responded dismissively. Now, Snotlout, you are on timeout. No more stoic time for you. Wait, but... Hiccup, you're on whatever the opposite of a timeout is. Either way, it also means no more stoic time for you. At least for today. Hiccup frowned. I can't just... Yes, you can. You're chief of Berk. Go do something chiefly. Or, even better, go do something not chiefly. I'll stay here for at least the rest of the day. If you can send Gobber or Fishlegs maybe for a shift overnight, that would be great, but if not, Astrid shrugged. I'll be here. Hiccup stared at her, clearly warring between his instinct to argue and his deep desire to take her offer at face value. Astrid leaned up and kissed the tip of his nose. Go. I'll be fine. You guys are disgusting. Still pressed close to Hiccup, and hand resting softly on either side of his face, she said softly, I'm going to kill him. How have you not killed him already? I try to make it a habit to not kill my friends. Astrid hummed, that's a very endearing quality of yours. Also annoying. Do me a favor and try to get Hookfang to shake him loose when you're out with him. I don't think so, Astrid. That's for the best. I like doing it myself anyways. She hopped away from him and stomped back towards the house. Get lost, boys. I'll kick Fishlegs out, too. Hopefully he hasn't gone and destroyed the timeline in these last 5 minutes. Hash hash hash. Starving as she was, and trying to set a better example for Hiccup, Astrid decided she would go about trying to cook them some lunch. Stoic looked at her skeptically as she made her proposal. You've much experience cooking, lass. Well, Astrid considered as she dug through the food Gobber had provided the night before. There was definitely enough to make a solid stew. I was never a good student for my mother, but the group of us spent enough time, off Berk that we all had to do some cooking by necessity. Hiccup's better than me, and Fishlegs is the best of any of us, but I can do edible. I am, however, permanently banned from making Snoggletog drinks, but I am working on appealing that ruling. Stoic chuckled as he moved to join her. I would think having a chief as your betrothed would assist in that process. Not when he's the one who banned me, she complained. Stoic laughed and handed Astrid a knife. She began cutting potatoes while Stoic worked on the meat. Am I allowed to ask how long you and Hiccup have been betrothed? Astrid hesitated, but answered vaguely, a while. I think that's one reason why we haven't really been in a rush to do the whole marriage thing. We both got betrothed way younger than we had anticipated and neither of us feels ready. Really, neither of us grew up thinking we'd ever. Anyways, we're kind of just working on our own timeline, not that everyone else isn't trying to put their own timeline on us. Gobber especially. But it'll happen. Eventually. When we get around to it. Things just got extra complicated after he became chief. Stoic glanced up at her, but looked away when Astrid noticed. He became very focused on his task and so Astrid returned her attention to hers. She was trying to think of something neutral to discuss when he told her, "It's good of you, marrying him." Astrid's hand stalled halfway through a potato. "Good of me," she repeated numbly, pulling the knife out of the spud and setting it down. "Oh. Oh. Oh no. I told Hiccup, it's a smart match," you two. Stoic added easily, like he wasn't saying possibly the cruelest thing that Astrid had ever heard. "I see." For a spitfire of a moment she was more annoyed with herself than him. It had been naive of her not to have expected this. Thing was, for so long, her and Hiccup had seemed like such an inevitability, the good kind that let them take their time, knowing one day, that she had forgotten that it had once seemed like something else. The other kind of inevitability, the kind that had weighed down her bones like a curse. Astrid stretched out her hands to stop herself from grabbing the knife and slamming it into the table between them both. But even as she held herself back from an extreme and violent reaction, she couldn't just do nothing. Leave him with that idea. Astrid couldn't bear it. Even if she had just torn Snottle out a new one for doing the same thing. Knowing it was stupid and ill-advised, but also the right thing, Astrid looked up at her old chief, his own actions stalling as he looked back at her quizzically, not understanding her reaction. "I understand what you assume," she told him, in the calm tone of voice that all of her friends knew to fear. Both her hands were white-knuckling the edge of the table. "I heard all the rumors back then. In fact, those rumors are why I was never a good student for my mother. I didn't want to know how to cook, I didn't want to learn how to sew, I didn't want to learn anything that made me seem marriageable. The flaw in my plan being that the only person who seemed even less marriageable than me was, well, Hiccup. So it was a hard bar to clear." Stoic nodded in understanding of her sacrifice, and Astrid wanted to vomit. "It seems he's grown," at least he told her, like it was a consolation. "You're misunderstanding me. I didn't agree to marry Hiccup out of any sense of honor or duty. I'm not here to puppeteer his chiefdom, to go down in history as either his beloved or conniving wife. Hiccup has done so much for Berk, and a lot of it long before he was ever chief. And, I know, the stories you're hearing from us sound impossible to believe, especially when we can't tell you the full story, but you need to trust me when I say the parts we can't tell you only make what he's done more impressive. Hiccup is beloved by his people. The pride of Berk," Astrid promised, very aware she now had all of Stoic's attention. Looking a bit like he was struggling to speak, Stoic told her, "All I ever wanted was for Hiccup to fit in." Astrid shook her head. "He never needed to fit in. We needed to fit him." Feeling a bit unsettled and uncomfortable, emotional conversations weren't exactly her forte either, Astrid returned some attention back to her potatoes, desperate to give her hands something to do. "Years ago, on the day Hiccup changed everything, I stood by him. I was the only one to, and he asked me why, and you know what I told him. I said that I wanted to see what he did next, but it was more than that. I wanted to be a part of it. A part of his chiefdom." Stoic asked skeptically. Astrid looked at him sadly. "A part of him. That's why I want to marry him too. You know, one day." Deciding on another tactic, she said, "A few years ago, the lot of us, Hiccup, Fishlegs, Snotlout, the twins, and I, decided to go live elsewhere for a while. It was Hiccup's idea. He was always chasing after adventure. Still is, really. And, honestly, he was trying to delay the chief responsibilities. He knew you were eager to start teaching him, and he wasn't ready to give up the idea of exploring. So we found an island not too far away to make our home base, and Hiccup swore that on that island, there would be no chief, no leader. The 6 of us would be a team of equals. Anyways, years after the fact, you and I were talking about our group's little experiment, and you told me that you had put on quite a show of hemming and hawing and reluctant agreement, but that as soon as you were away from Hiccup you laughed and laughed." Astrid's actions stalled as she smiled at the memory. It was one of the last quiet evenings she had ever had with Stoic. "You said you knew that, despite Hiccup's best efforts to avoid chiefing, that he had created a better practice run at it than you could have ever possibly designed. And you were right. Hiccup might have relied on his friends on that island, he still does, but he came out of that time more ready to take on the role than I think even he realized. While we lived on that island, Hiccup had seen battles and wars and losses like he couldn't have fathomed before. He learned to trust his instincts and his skill set and use all of his resources. He was a good leader. Having finished chopping her potatoes, she gathered them up to place in the pot. We talked a lot about Hiccup as chief that night. You told me. You said that every chief's greatest hope is that their legacy will be one of leaving their tribe better and safer than before. But you. Astrid met her old chief's eyes, surprised to find that they were watering. She was even more surprised to discover that her own might be as well. You said that you were certain when your name was mentioned in our history books, it would be first as Hiccup's father. And that you couldn't imagine any better legacy to have. She reached forward and grabbed onto one of his hands. You were so proud of your son, and so excited to see him as chief. Were we close? Stoic asked nervously. Very, Astrid told him sincerely. That's part of why this is so hard for him. He doesn't like thinking about the time when you two weren't. Stoic sniffled loudly, but no tears fell. His nods were small and appreciative. Thank you, lass. Astrid pulled away, but wasn't quite ready to let her initial point drop. Like I said, I know a lot of this sounds unbelievable, but if there is one thing I need you to trust, it is this: I would not lower myself to marry someone I did not consider my equal. I am betrothed to him because I want to be and I love him. And I will marry him. Stoic's smile was shaky and his eyes shiny as he said, when you get around to it, eh? When we get around to it, Astrid agreed, chuckling. I remember marrying Hiccup's mother like it was yesterday, and you're right, there is a lot of pomp and circumstance when you are chief. I was always grateful for Valka enduring it all with me. While Stoic appeared lost in fond memories, Astrid grew uncomfortable again, feeling like a very Valka is a life-sized axe was hanging above their heads. As a distraction, she rebusied herself with the potatoes, putting the remaining chopped pieces in the pot and moving to grab the carrots and begin chopping those. Anything to not have to meet his eyes again. Right. Well, one day, I will endure it for him. That's what we do when we love someone. Right you are, Miss Horferson. And thank you. Stoic waited until Astrid's eyes drifted up again so he could tell her sincerely, thank you. I see it now. You two aren't just a smart match. You're a good one. And you're good for him, I see that now. I hope he is as good to you as you are to him. Feeling embarrassingly close to bursting into tears in front of the man she considered both as her warrior idol and basically her father-in-law, Astrid assured him, he is. Like I said, I was basically unmarriageable. Not that I was really interested in the idea until I was, I guess. Ah, that reminds me of me and Valka. See, when we met. The two of them continued making stew in easy companionship, Stoic regaling Astrid with stories she had heard from him before, but hadn't thought she would ever have the privilege of hearing again. Notes. I am realizing that where I am in writing is definitely the midpoint or past it. My estimate has shifted up, classic, to this story likely being either side of 15 chapters. I've got emotional beats and big plot points to still hit, but if anyone has any scene ideas they are hoping to see, let me know while we're in the humdrum of the middle of the story. I won't make any promises, but I'm happy to consider anything. Comments and kudos make me very happy. Heart. Chapter 8, Chapter 8. Notes. IDK how many chapters this'll be still, exactly, but I do have the rest of the story's week plotted out more or less. For those who haven't been tracking, we are on day 3 of the week. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Astrid wouldn't stop staring at Hiccup. It was a miracle Hiccup even noticed, distracted as he was with the uneven ground beneath their feet and the hunt for any new tracks their mysterious dragon could have left. But notice he did. Apparently, Gobber had returned at the day's end to take the overnight shift, freeing Astrid to return home, only to find Hiccup already passed out in their bed. He'd done his best to make productive use of his half-day away from his father, dealing with as many chief tasks as he could so that he didn't have any spare brain power left to think about his dad. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, between the stress and high emotions of the last few days, his near non-existent sleep the night before, and his unrelated not great sleep the rest of the week prior, Hiccup's mind began shutting down on him. So that night, which happened to him every few weeks, Hiccup barely made it to dinner before crashing in his bed, instantly fast asleep. When Hiccup woke up with Astrid beside him, he was pretty sure they were equally surprised to find the other there, him having been asleep when she joined and her so used to him waking up first. With both of them fresh off a rare night of good sleep, it wasn't too hard for Hiccup to convince Astrid to rise early and head into the forest, only stopping briefly to send Fishlegs to see if Gobber needed a break or more supplies. Do we really trust Fishlegs to stand in the way of Stoic the Vast if your dad decides he's done being cooped up in that moldy old shack? Astrid had asked as they walked away from Fishlegs' home. Hiccup sighed. We'll see what Gobber thinks, but maybe we should send him with Snot. No. Once they reached the forest, the two of them mostly walked in easy silence. Their dragons had flown them to the first trap, but after that the forest was tricky to fly in and the traps within easy walking distance, well, easy on 2 feet, so they just decided to go on foot. It was a nice day out for it anyways. Stormfly led the pack, instinctively tracking, while Toothless bounded back and forth between his dragon friend, his rider, and whatever else distracted him along their way. It was nice, seeing Toothless look at ease again. For the most part, they really only spoke to coordinate their direction or free any innocent dragons their traps caught on accident. So they were an hour into walking and on their way to the 4th trap when Hiccup finally asked, "What is it?" Astrid asked innocently. "What is what?" "You're staring." "I don't think so." Hiccup stopped walking. "Astrid. What did my dad say to you?" Astrid's sigh was more like a groan and she finally stopped walking too, turning around to face him with her hands on her hips. "He thanked me for marrying you." Hiccup said and resumed walking. Astrid stared at him like he had a second head. She mocked him, falling back into step. "That's it. What do you want me to say, Astrid? Are you surprised he thinks that?" "Well, no. Exactly." Now Astrid stopped walking, yanking roughly on his arm so he was forced to stop and face her, too. "Why didn't you correct him?" "You corrected him." "Of course, I corrected him. He told me that he called us a smart match to you. Did you not try to correct him?" Hiccup's hands raised and dropped in defeat. "I didn't see much point in trying. And it didn't seem like it mattered. And I thought we were trying to tell him less." "Well, yeah, but Hiccup," Astrid bit her lip and took a step back, shaking out her arms and blowing out thick puffs of air, a tick of hers when she got worked up and her body wanted her to act instead of just speak. With how oblivious and avoidant he was and how reactive she was, it was miraculous that they had built a healthy and stable relationship. Actually, miraculous was the wrong word for it. It had been long and hard and delicate work. In one way or another, both of them had needed to learn how to use their words. Sometimes, when Astrid got too worked up, her body wanted to take over and usually that meant punching something, which wasn't conducive to most talks about emotions. So, when the urge overtook her, she would take a second to shake her muscles and body loose, remind herself that it wasn't a moment of fight or flight. Especially since Astrid always chose fight. He gave her a moment and let her step back in when she was ready. I didn't like how I felt when he said that. I didn't like thinking he thought I would be okay with that, but more than anything I hated that he thought you weren't someone I could love. Hiccup thought about how he'd felt when his father had made the assumption to him. A smart match. The insecurity and rage, on his behalf and Astrid's. He also thought about how much this idea had lingered over their entire relationship and it suddenly seemed like they had been playing a years-long game of chicken. Who was going to bring it up first? He did. I never would have been okay with you being arranged to marry me when we were younger. I know I had a massive crush on you, but I wouldn't have gone along with that. I know, Astrid told him, eyes warming. Even back then. I thought a lot of things about you I'll spend my whole life regretting, but you didn't seem the type to force someone to marry you. I was afraid for a long time, though, that your dad wouldn't care. So was I. Astrid stepped closer and grabbed one of his hands. I told him that I would never marry someone I didn't consider my equal and the only reason I'm marrying you is because I want to. Hiccup looked down at their hands when he asked, did he believe you? Yeah, I think he did. I think it brought him a lot of comfort, too. The two of them started walking again. They weren't much of the hand-holding type and so their hands swung loose, but they stayed closed, their arms or shoulders brushing. We talked a lot after that. It was nice. He told me old stories about your mom. Did you tell him you've heard them before? No. It was nice to hear them again. She nudged his shoulder. We should tell your mom. No, I don't think we should. Hiccup. No, I've thought about this. I have. And the whole reason my mom never came back was because she thought my dad was this man. And I am so happy she got to meet who he became before he. I don't want to ruin that. She saw the best version of him after 20 years, and that's how she should remember him. He could feel Astrid's eyes on him as he kept his on the ground beneath his feet. He knew she wanted to argue, believed that his mother had a right to know, but he also knew she was working out what Hiccup was saying. How much he wished he didn't have to have his memory twisted like this. Maybe she would have still argued with him, defended his mom's right to choose, but that was when Stormfly squawked that they had arrived at the fourth trap. And the yellow-scaled dragon captured within it. Is that? Astrid asked. Yeah, that's it. Hiccup approached slowly while Astrid stayed behind. Without discussing it, the two of them knew that they didn't want to overwhelm the Time Flyer. Astrid fed Stormfly treats for her good work and pet Toothless when the dragon nuzzled his head under her arm for attention as well. Hiccup put his hands up in a placating manner as he approached. Astrid and Fishlegs had elected for cage traps rather than net traps. The cage traps were clunkier, a bit easier for dragons to spot, and they had a more limited supply, but they were more comfortable for the dragons they did catch compared to being compressed and tangled in rope. Either way, the yellow dragon didn't look pleased, moving as far from Hiccup as it could within the limits of the small space. It's okay, Hiccup crooned. I'm not here to hurt you. In fact, I want to help. He turned to Astrid and put his hands up. Knowing what he was asking for, she reached into Stormfly's saddle and tossed him one of the fish in there, both of their dragons watching the fish soar through the air. Hiccup caught fish, still gross to him after all this time, and slowly moved forward to place it within the Time Flyer's cage before moving backwards. The dragon looked at Hiccup skeptically before moving towards the fish, one slow inch at a time. Yeah, see. Hiccup told the Time Flyer. We're not so bad. As the dragon chewed on his fish, Hiccup tried to look for signs of injury. If the dragon couldn't fly, it had to be an issue with the wings. It was hard to tell with the wings pressed against his body, but Hiccup wasn't seeing any obvious tears and no awkward angles belying a broken bone. Then, as the Time Flyer swallowed the last bite, the edge of its tail swished in front of it. No way, Hiccup moved slowly as he returned to Astrid, no sudden movements to startle the poor dragon, and told Astrid, "You'll never believe this. It's the tail fin." Both Astrid and Toothless startled at the latter's tail flicking instinctively. How bad is it? I mean, Astrid glanced at Toothless, who looked a bit offended by it, curling around Hiccup. Not as bad as Toothless, Hiccup confirmed, offering his dragon a commiserating chin scratch. It's just a tear, not a total loss. But it's an injury that won't heal in a few days. Could you, I don't know, help him? Like you helped Toothless? Still petting his dragon, Hiccup looked at the complicated mechanism on Toothless' tail. At this point, Toothless had half a dozen versions on standby depending if Hiccup needed to bump Toothless' speed or endurance or the like. Then, of course, there was both of their least favorite tail fin, Toothless' solo tail fin. The first one had been designed for Snoggletog all those years ago and had undergone far fewer upgrades than the others purely out of the fact that Hiccup didn't like thinking about it and Toothless hardly allowed him to strap the thing on. Now, Hiccup could fix or whip up a tail fin design pretty quickly and even Gobber knew the basics, but that was Toothless' tail design. This was a whole new dragon, a whole new design. And that was before they even broached getting the Time Flyer used to it. And all of that was before they had to convince Stoic to go alone with their crazy idea. Do I have another choice? Hiccup asked. Probably not, but you definitely have an excuse to avoid your father now. Hiccup snorted. Yeah, I'll just tell him I'm building a dragon tail. That'll go over well. Okay, how about I stay here with the Time Flyer and start to work on some basic trust building? Go ask Gobber if he can watch my dad again. We'll need Fishlegs' help treating the dragon. And Snotlout, too. Hookfang is the best dragon to carry the Time Flyer to the old academy. It'll have more space there, at least, and it's quieter there than the stables. After that, we'll, see what we can do, I guess. We've got, what? 5 more days. Maybe. We work best under pressure. We got this. Hiccup turned to study the scared, injured dragon. I sure hope you actually believe. Hash hash hash. So, that's what a dragon that can fly through time looks like, Fishlegs commented nervously, the group of them looking down at the dragon enclosed within the academy. Snotlout scoffed. It doesn't look very scary. I don't think it's trying to look scary, Hiccup told him. I think it prefers to avoid the fight. Yeah, well, it sucks at that too. Astrid punched Snotlout's shoulder and Fishlegs turned to Hiccup. Are you really going to try to get a new tail fin made for it within the next few days? Hiccup rubbed the back of his neck nervously. I mean, yeah. I gotta try. Gobble be able to help. When he's not with my dad, that is. We'll use Toothless Solo Fin as a base, add some more support for the damaged tail fin that is there and adjust, I guess. Fishlegs, when you're treating the wound, can you get me exact measurements of the tail? I eyeballed best I could, but it would be good to get confirmation. Fishlegs nodded. You got it. We really should get some disinfectant on that wound as soon as possible. Have you been able to handle the dragon at all? It wouldn't let me touch it. What? Snotlout mocked, holding up one palm. The hand thing didn't work. There's no hand thing. Snotlout looked at the other two. He definitely has a hand thing, right? Astrid punched him again, careful to hit the exact same spot so it hurt worse the second time. It's a scared and injured dragon, she said, like it was easy. We dealt with those all the time on the edge. We know what we're doing. Taking 2 big steps away from Astrid, Snotlout said, okay, that's great and all, go team, but I'll ask the question no one wants to. How exactly do we train a dragon to fly through time and land when we want it to? Getting Hiccup's dad on that thing is one thing, but getting it to take him back where it picked him up sounds impossible to me. Astrid glanced nervously at Hiccup first before twisting her face back into a glare. You got another grand idea, Big Mouth? We'll figure it out. We always do. I'm actually more worried about convincing Chief Stoic to go with this plan, Fishlegs helpful added. Very encouraging, you two, Astrid growled at them. At some point Hiccup realized they had stopped talking, which meant they were probably looking at him, but Hiccup's eyes were on the Time Flyer. The way it moved, sniffing every inch of the ground except when a breeze blew through, then it raised its snout, turning into the wind, and breathing in deeply. At times its movements looked erratic, circling back on itself, but they weren't erratic. Hiccup had seen Stormfly do the same thing when she was following a scent. His dad's dragon, Skullcrusher, had done the same too when able to graze in a large space. Hiccup? Astrid asked, and he was pretty sure it wasn't the first time she had said his name. It's a tracker class, Hiccup mumbled. What? It's a tracker class, Hiccup said louder, more certain. It makes sense, right? I mean, maybe it's not a coincidence that of all the places and times for that dragon and my dad to crash, it's right in front of me. Maybe the Time Flyer followed my dad's scent to me, his son. Everyone watched the Time Flyer turn its snout to the breeze again. Hiccup knew that Astrid was seeing what he was, and she nodded, her eyes alight. Okay, so maybe if we give it a new scent to follow. Fishlegs was nearly bouncing with excitement, like something your dad brought with him. It's a risk, Hiccup said, his heart pounding for the first time in days with something other than terror or rage. This was excitement. Adventure. A challenge. But it's possible. Astrid turned to Snotlout triumphantly. And that would be how you train a dragon to fly through time. Notes. Not the most dramatic chapter, but a needed conversation between Hickstrid and good forward motion on plot. Chapter 9, Chapter 9. Notes. This is another big one, gang. NGL, I teared up a bit writing it. Brace yourselves, but like, in a good way. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. It took some work, but Hiccup convinced Astrid that he was fine to take the overnight shift with his father. Look, you and I both know I'm not sleeping tonight. I have a whole new tail fin to design and a lot of work ahead of me. I might as well be the one to keep an eye on my dad if I'm not going to sleep. He wasn't entirely certain if she was more concerned over him not sleeping or him being around his dad, but she knew how he got when he had a new project, and that was without the incredibly short and immovable deadline they had. If she kept him from Stoic, he would just make his way to the forge in the middle of the night. Gobber had stayed late enough that Hiccup didn't have to make much small talk before his father turned in, sleeping in Mildew's small bedroom. Hiccup stayed out, working on his preliminary sketch designs on the small dining table. Hiccup had tried and failed to explain it to Astrid over and over, but working on projects like this was as meditative to him as it was maddening. Sure, it was frustrating when he couldn't get the project to work right, but it took up his entire focus and utilized a skill set he knew he was good at. A skill set he had learned long before he was chief or a dragon master or anything worth noting. Even back when he was Hiccup the Useless, he could still design and smith and craft. That being said, he's looked at some of his old designs. It was most certainly a skill set he had vastly improved upon. Focused as he was, he didn't even hear his father approach until, "Shouldn't you be sleeping?" Hiccup nearly jumped out of his seat, then put his face in his hands as his heart rate calmed down. "You sound like Astrid. Besides, it's not that late. It's 2 in the morning, son." Hiccup peeked between his fingers to glance outside. "Oh." Stoic stepped closer and Hiccup nearly threw his body over all his designs but... Well, his dad was going to see the tailfin, wasn't he? If he had to ride the time flyer back to his time, there was no way he wouldn't. So Hiccup pursed his lips hard and grit his teeth as his father studied the various sketches. "A dragon tail?" he asked skeptically, looking down to where Hiccup sat. "Yeah. The time flyer is injured, like we suspected. It can't fly with an injured tailfin, and if it can't fly, it can't take you home, so..." Hiccup gestured to the designs. Stoic picked one of the sketches to study further and Hiccup cringed, then ripped it out of his hand before he could stop himself. Sorry, that's just... that design won't work." Hiccup looked through his pile of pages until he found the one he wanted. "Here. This is my best guess so far. Of course, I'll have a better idea once I get into the forge and there will probably need to be adjustments after the first fitting." Stoic's expression for once was stoic, looking over Hiccup's design with a quiet thoughtfulness that made the young Viking want to squirm. He wasn't sure he had ever felt more like a 15-year-old than this moment. How many times had he shown his father his designs, even as a 14-year-old, only for Stoic to declare them nonsense or not a priority, the latter just being a nicer way of calling them nonsense. And this was a dragon tail, a mechanization specifically designed to help a dragon fly. Which probably seemed insane when you came from the era of a downed dragon is a dead dragon. Finally, his dad asked, "You really think this will work?" On instinct, Hiccup bristled, hearing an accusation in the words, but no. Stoic wasn't looking at him like he was a dragon-loving, crazy contraption-making lunatic. He was just asking. What could Hiccup say? "Well, I have a lot of experience making dragon tail fins, but this is a new design for a new dragon, so theoretically I think it could work, but I don't actually have a real clue. Did I mention the tail fins I make are for my Night Fury best friend? I have reason to believe it might. With some adjustments. Trials and errors, you know. Gobber will help me rush production once I have a schematic, I'm confident in." Still holding on to Hiccup's newest design, Stoic leafed through the old versions on the table, some only half drawn before they were discarded. "You've gotten better. You never looked at my designs." "I always look at your designs," Hiccup he said casually, "doesn't mean I always understood them. But I understand these. For the most part at least. Of course, in any matter like this, I would ask Gobber's opinion since he's the expert, but these sound. Well, as sound as any design to help a dragonfly can be." Hiccup was so wrapped up in the earlier comments that he barely even flagged the anti-dragon sentiment at the end. He looked at my designs. "I thought you didn't like all the time I spent at the forge." Stoic shrugged, shuffling the second chair Gobber had brought in earlier so that he could sit at the table with him. I worried about you. Worried about the sort of Viking I would become. I worried you were spending so much time alone that you wouldn't know how to be with your own people. I worried that you would spend so much time sharpening weapons that you wouldn't learn how to wield one. Hiccup fiddled with his pencil. You were a little right on both fronts, to be fair. Without going into too much detail, I basically went from village outcast to village hero overnight, and it was a lot. I wasn't really used to being around my own people. But you got better, yes. Hiccup felt a bit of a smile creep on his lips. I think you'd get varying responses if you asked others about that, but, yeah. For the most part. And, boy, was this last year a crash course. Astrid says if she had to talk to as many complaining people as I did on an average day, she wouldn't make it to noon without killing someone. Stoic laughed at that. Oh, I remember the early months of my chiefdom well. I don't think I slept more than 4 hours a night. Yeah, it's impossible, right? Hiccup agreed, his pencil stilling. I mean, I'm getting a little better at it now, but just everyone always needs something. And I want to help them. But you feel like if you're on your feet for one more second, you'll actually collapse. At least you had 2 feet, Hiccup joked. Stoic's expression fell and Hiccup cringed. Too soon, he worried. Only for Stoic to bark out a laugh. I wouldn't know how soon it is, but good on you, not letting it slow you down. So, you can handle people, more or less. What about the weapons? Hiccup hesitated before thinking fuck it, and stood up. Stoic watched him quizzically as he did so, but didn't say anything as Hiccup pulled out the handle of his flame sword and swung it around to extend the blade. It was only when Hiccup lit it on fire that his father reacted, nearly jumping out of his seat. Hiccup gave it a few test swings before returning the sword to its unlit, compacted sword handle. Your design, I presume, he asked, even sounding a little impressed. Yeah, Hiccup said, feeling more confident. I've got a shield that's also a crossbow, but that's harder to lug around on an average day. But can you use them? The weapons. Hiccup considered, and answered honestly, I'm a better shot than you'd expect, and according to Astrid I am passably not embarrassing with the sword, so that's something, I guess. She still trains with me, but it's been harder to find time with, everything, he said, waving his hands vaguely. I suspect Astrid has a high bar, so anything resembling a compliment should be taken as one. Hiccup snorted. Yeah, trust me, neither being her chief nor her betrothed buy me any favor in training. She is brutal. When Stoic didn't respond right away, only looking at him a bit strangely, Hiccup asked, what is it? Astrid said something the other day. She said that you didn't need to fit in, but that we needed to fit you. These strange weapons. I never would have thought of a Viking with a flame sword, but it works for you. Hiccup thought of all the times it had gotten him out of a scrape, both in the days of the Edge and Viggo and Johan, but also how useful it was with dragon training, saving his skin in the cave he met his mother. Yeah. It definitely works for me. Good. That's good. At his father's mention of Astrid, Hiccup suddenly remembered his own talk with his betrothed earlier, and started saying, would you really have, but then he bit his lip. He hadn't meant to bring it up again, but his father was just watching him with a raised eyebrow and it was like he could hear Astrid encouraging him to just say it. Would you really have arranged for me to marry Astrid? Stoic sighed, a heavy sound, but he didn't seem surprised by Hiccup's question. I always hoped you would find someone you loved like I loved your mother. If you had, I wouldn't have dared to interfere. But if you got older and hadn't found it and there were still concerns. I don't know. I wouldn't have wanted to think about it, but I don't know for sure. His dad looked a bit regretful at his words and added, you should know that I am very glad it never came to that. All I have ever wanted is for you to have a good life, one filled with love, and for you to be a good man to your people. That whole week, Hiccup had felt like he was having the worst kind of déjà vu, but apparently having the good kind was way more disorienting. He felt almost breathless as he said, I definitely have the first. And I try to be the second. Best I can. But you've made mistakes. Feeling his father's words like a sudden blow, Hiccup flinched hard. Yeah, I got you killed. And that's just the start of the list. Hiccup Stoic reached forward and placed a hand over one of Hiccup's clenched fists. You know how I know. Because we've all made mistakes. Odin knows I have made more than my fair share, especially when I was a young chief and you. You're a younger chief than I ever was, and I am so sorry that I'm not still with you to provide guidance and advice, yes, but also reassurance. My father stood right beside me that whole first year of being chief. I would have wanted that for you too. Hiccup pulled his hand away. Not your fault, he said bitterly. Not yours either. Seeing Hiccup startle, Stoic smiled sadly. I don't know what happened, and I suspect I shouldn't know, but whatever did happen. It wasn't your fault, son. You died saving my life. You died in a battle I started, a battle you warned me not to. You died because I wasn't smart enough, quick enough, because I thought my way was better. Hiccup had so much he wanted to say, but couldn't. Even if they weren't worried about time, some truths were too heavy still for Hiccup to speak aloud. Instead, all he could offer was the paltry reassurance he'd been telling himself since that day. You made it to Valhalla. His father leaned back and nodded once, resolutely. Then I died well. And I left a good legacy in my wake. You really were one of Berk's greatest chiefs, Hiccup agreed, constantly aware of the shadow he worked in as Berk's leader. I hope so, but that's not the legacy I meant. Hiccup wiped roughly at one of his eyes and laughed nervously, embarrassed. Gods, this is. Sorry. I just. You have no idea how much I've missed you, Dad. Well, I'm glad to hear it, because I'm pretty sure the brat I'm trying to go home to celebrates every time I leave the village. Hiccup managed to look aghast for one whole second before breaking out in laughter, his father chuckling along, looking more than a bit relieved at Hiccup's humor. When Hiccup was collected enough to speak, he told his father, "You're not wrong. Although, you did once get volunteers for a deadly mission by saying anyone who remained had to watch me. And you got a lot of volunteers, so the feeling seemed generally mutual. You think I only did that once?" Hiccup snorted. "And I suppose I once did melt down all of our bowls to make a catapult," Stoic supplied, his own eyes alight at the memory. "And it was a ruddy awful contraption. It would have been one thing if the damn thing worked, but it could only throw a 1-pound pebble, and even then it would land 2 feet away. If even." Thinking of the bowler launcher he would one day develop, Hiccup shrugged. Early design." Stoic scoffed, but it was lightly teasing, not dismissively mocking. Hiccup felt like he was one more kind thing away from bursting into an embarrassing amount of tears. This entire time, Hiccup had been reminding himself over and over that this man wasn't him, that he wasn't getting the chance to see his father again. This was someone else. But this felt like his dad. "I wish I didn't have to forget all of this," Stoic said. Any smile on Hiccup's face dropped. "But you have to, otherwise. All this good stuff might not happen. I know. It's not easy, though. You, Hiccup. Every day, I swear, I look at you, my version of you, and my heart breaks because I don't understand. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know how to help you." His eyes turned imploring as he added, "But you do." Hiccup began fidgeting with a pencil once more, thinking that his 14-year-old self would have a lot to say to that. He probably could present a detailed list of all the instances he felt his father had gone wrong or should have listened. But now. You did your best. So did I. We just needed a catalyst. And then there were still growing pains afterwards, but it was like we finally had common ground. And once we had that, Hiccup shrugged. Anything was possible. "Can you at least tell me how long I've got to wait for this catalyst?" "Not too long," Hiccup assured him. "Things'll get worse before they get better, but they do get better. Then all there is to do is wait, and keep trying my best in the meantime." Stoic smiled encouragingly at his son, and Hiccup felt himself smile back. "Well, that and figure out this damn tailfin design. How can I help? ###. By the time Astrid came to get Hiccup in the morning, Mildew's house looked like a madhouse, not that Hiccup quite realized it. Discarded sketches were everywhere, any table, the floor itself, a few were even tacked to the wall with a knife. Stoic was asleep in one of the deeply uncomfortable main room chairs, and Hiccup sat on top of the small kitchen table, and more sketches, staring at his most recent design on the wall in front of him. The sketch took up multiple sheets of paper, and multiple knives. What happened here? Hiccup startled from his sketch, just now realizing it was morning. He hadn't slept at all, he realized. Well, that's not ideal, he muttered. What's that? Nothing. Hiccup twisted in his seat to face his betrothed. Well, a lot of things. I don't know. Even I'll admit I'm exhausted right now. Anyways, I think I have a possibly working tail fin design. Astrid looked around at all the discarded sketches. I should hope so. Is that it? She asked, pointing to the large one on the wall. Yeah, wait. Hiccup scurried forward and made one final angle adjustment in the design. Now it is. Hopefully. Maybe. We'll find out. Leaning over to clock his dad in the main room, Astrid pointed and said, and what about him? Oh, he fell asleep. Hiccup scrambled for any sense of time and found none. Some time ago. While you were, she gestured to the sketch mess. Oh, yeah. He was helping. Well, helping like how you help. I talked at him, he asked occasionally helpful questions, that sort of thing. I'll try not to be offended by that, Astrid muttered. He suggested putting them on the walls. Something about shifting perspective. Or maybe it was a joke. Hiccup squinted as he tried to remember. Not sure. Okay, so you need sleep, Astrid commented. Hiccup nodded. Desperately. But, first, I got to get this design to Gobber. He can start on the basic framework while I try to get some sleep before I literally die. Then Hiccup frowned as he remembered, but I also need to work on training the dragon. Fishlegs is tending to the time flyer's wounds this morning, and I told him to come find me around midday. Why don't you go sleep until then, and then you and I can work with the dragon together? Hiccup's eyes squinted, trying very hard to put two and two together. He pointed at himself. Wait, if I'm sleeping, and you're with my dad, he said, turning his finger to her, and Gobber's working on my tail fin design, who's in charge of the island? It certainly wasn't his mother. Apparently 20 years away from people meant she wasn't the greatest, you know, with people. Which meant the one in charge was, technically. I think's not loud. Hiccup grimaced and Astrid grinned. I know. I have 5 gold coins in that a building burns before nightfall. Please tell me you're kidding. She poked his stomach. I am not. But I'll donate my winnings to Burke's coffers. Anyways, I wanted the morning shift so I could check in with you and ask about how last night went. Which, I gotta say, I have even less of an idea of now, she said, seeming to startle as she found a sketch stabbed into the ceiling with a spear, carefully maneuvering the both of them so they were no longer beneath it. Hiccup only hoped she didn't look too closely at the speared design. He remembered it being particularly bad. That was why it had been banished to the ceiling, obviously. Astrid looked at him and he looked back. Well? She asked. Well, what? After rolling her eyes and muttering something that sounded like mutton head, she asked again, slower this time, how was last night? Oh. Yeah. It was good, he told her honestly, but still Astrid looked skeptical. No, it really was. We talked and it was kind of like it was before. Sure, there were things I couldn't tell him about, but I never got to talk to my dad about what it was like being chief. Whatever you said to him yesterday, Astrid, it helped. It really helped. And Astrid was grinning and Hiccup was exhausted and happy and he wanted to kiss her, and so he did. She was amazing, perfect, indescribable, the best thing in his life. She made everything better. She gave him his dad back. Astrid laughed as he kissed her, having to push him back a bit so she could speak. All I told him was the truth. Now, do I need to walk you to Toothless, or are you okay? No. Yes. Maybe. I don't know. He leaned forward to kiss her again and Astrid obliged him for just another second. Babe, your dad is literally in the same room as us. Hiccup scrunched up his face. Buzzkill. And trying to be, she stepped back and carefully pulled out the knives of his final sketch design. Go sleep. I'll wake you when Fishlegs gets here. Then we can check in on your design with Gobber and try to make some more progress with the time flyer. She lightly shoved the folded up design into his chest and his hands reached up for it on reflex. While he had been nodding along as she spoke, as soon as she was done, he said, I'm going to need you to repeat that all to me later, but I assume it's a good plan because it's your plan. Safe assumption, Astrid agreed, lightly grabbing his arm and guiding him to the door. Now, are you sure you can walk safely? Probably. You've worked with worse odds. Astrid opened the door and Hiccup lingered, leaning against the doorway. I love you. Smirking, she said, I know that. I miss my dad. Her smile slid off slowly. Yeah, I know that too, Hiccup. She leaned forward and gave him one final peck on the cheek. But you're not alone, and you never will be again. But I will be if you don't go to bed soon. Because I'll die. Because I'll kill you. Go sleep, babe. And she slammed the door in his face. Notes. One thing about this fic is I didn't inherently want to use like the bad parent Stoic tag because, while I think there's some validity there and he certainly was a flawed father, I didn't ever want this to be a story about how Stoic didn't love Hiccup. And I think at this point Hiccup wouldn't really be angry at his father anymore, because now Hiccup understands his father and has seen him grow, seen the confirmation that he was always loved, but that this old version of Stoic is just reopening old wounds and just messing with the memory that Hiccup wants to preserve. Anyways, Stoic and Hiccup needed to finally bond now that Stoic had his good talk with Astrid. What a queen. Way to set him straight. And then some silly shenanigans at the end from sleep-deprived Hiccup. Hopefully not too silly. Also, I got my 3-chapter buffer back up by writing 2 yesterday and yeah. We got some good stuff coming up. Please keep commenting, they all bring me such joy and motivation and help make this a lot of fun. 3 and goodness knows I have no self-control, so whenever I finish the last chapter, still a ways away, you will get the entire dump of my written chapters all at once. Chapter 10, Chapter 10. Notes. This chapter definitely starts Hiccup stay focused and ends not that focused. Like tilde insinuations tilde are made for any who need that warning. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. When Hiccup opened his eyes, Astrid was on top of him, hands pinning his wrists by his head, both of them breathing heavily. Unfortunately, not in the hot way. Well. Not the time. Astrid let go of him when she saw he was awake and slid to sit next to him on their bed. Hiccup's hands moved to his face as he recovered from the nightmare, trying to settle his breathing and calm down. I didn't, Astrid stammered. You were fine until I tried to wake you. This happened sometimes. Not often, but especially in the aftermath of his father's death. Hiccup would have awful nightmares, replaying the moment over and over again, each iteration somehow worse than the one before it. When he woke up, he would be in such a panic that he would lash out and basically attack Astrid. Which would be a problem, except apparently Astrid took I could take you down in my sleep literally, so it generally wasn't something she couldn't easily handle. I thought you said things were good last night. They were, Hiccup answered into his palms. That's the problem, I think. I don't understand. Hiccup dropped his hands and rolled his head to meet her eyes staring down at him. Last night, he felt like my dad again, I guess. And it made me think of him again. My dad. Which is something I've been trying not to do lately, I'm realizing. Astrid slid down on the bed until she laid next to him on her side, bringing her hands up to start twisting a braid into his hair. Hiccup smiled and shifted to look up at the ceiling to give her a better angle. The last few days, the two of them had learned there was plenty they needed to talk about more, and that was something they would need to work on, but this. Hiccup missed his father and it wasn't new information and it wasn't something they needed to belabor. Astrid was there, with him, and understood how he felt, and that was enough. So, as she finished twisting that braid and moved to undo one of his older ones so she could redo it, she told him, the twins got back this morning. Hiccup frowned. Wait, weren't they supposed to get back last night? I'm still surprised they made it back at all. Did they get the herb? Oh, yes they did. Apparently the reason those two were late was because they lost your diagrams for the herb they needed. I gave them 4 copies. Astrid propped herself up on her elbows just long enough to give him a look that said you should have known that wasn't enough. Anyways, those mutton heads decided to compensate by grabbing a handful of every single plant they could find on the goddamned island. Miraculously, one of them did end up being the herb we need. So Goth I can make the medication. Yeah. She said it'll take a couple of days, though. Hiccup closed his eyes and did the math. Including Stoic's first day he crash-landed, they were on day 4. So that meant, we should have enough time then. I've got more good news for you, Astrid told him, finishing with his hair. Hiccup shifted so that he was on his side, facing her fully. You're spoiling me. Don't get used to it. Gobbus got the framework for the tailfin design. It's not complete, but he suggests doing a fitting now and then finalizing the prototype. Of course, we'll need to get the time flyer to let us put it on. Fishlegs said it wasn't very cooperative with medical treatment. Hiccup hummed. I think I know someone who can help with uncooperative dragons. Is this someone a black-scaled alpha dragon? Oh, so you know him, too. Astrid snorted at him and slapped his chest lightly for the stupid joke, and Hiccup felt a dumb grin grow on his face. Hey, how would you feel about spending the day with me at the Dragon Training Academy again? He asked. First off, it is well past midday, so not really a whole day, is it? Spoil sport. Secondly, Astrid rolled onto her back and stared upwards, putting on a show of consideration. I don't know. I was pretty competitive back in the academy days, which was really annoying when this one boy just kept beating me. Hiccup raised his eyebrows, barely keeping himself composed to ask, oh, is that so? Not in everything, mind you. I once watched him injure himself just trying to hold an axe. I'm sure he was still adjusting to his peg leg. You know, he could have maybe just gotten it modified that morning and it could have thrown his balance off. Mimicking him earlier, Astrid asked, oh, so you know him, too. Besides, I don't think it was the peg leg as much as it was his focus level. The boy was easily distracted. She leaned in conspiratorially. He was basically obsessed with me. With barely restrained laughter, Hiccup said, that must have been tough for him. Really embarrassing, she agreed, snuggling in close until she could rest her head on his chest and his arm could wrap around her waist. Can I tell you a secret? Always. She turned her head to look at him, and Astrid didn't often have a dumb grin like Hiccup did, but there was something in her eyes during moments like this, something totally relaxed and happy and utterly in love. I was kind of obsessed with him too, she admitted before kissing him. How embarrassing, Hiccup said, smiling against her lips. She pulled back, that soft look still in her eyes that he only ever got to see when they were alone. It was tough, she agreed. But worth it. So worth it. Hash hash hash. They maybe didn't get to the academy quite as efficiently as they had originally intended, especially since Astrid made sure they both ate something before leaving, but they got Gobbus framework and were outside the academy gates with what Hiccup had to hope was enough daylight left in the day. Astrid waited in the stands and gave Hiccup and Toothless a thumbs up when he turned to look at her. All right, but Hiccup said to his dragon. You ready? Toothless warbled a reluctant affirmation. While the dragon had seemed to take to being an alpha far better than Hiccup had taken to being chief, he still didn't seem to like forcing his will on others outside of battle demands. The idea, though, was that Toothless would use his influence just to help calm the Time Flyer. That was assuming Toothless' alpha status had any influence over a time-flying dragon. Hiccup pulled the lever to open up the gate and the Time Flyer immediately shrank back as far as it could. Toothless entered the arena first, slowly, with his head low to show he didn't mean harm. The slightest blue glow shone from beneath his scales as Toothless warbled at the Time Flyer. The Time Flyer seemed to startle even further at first, backing away from Toothless as best as it could with its back already against the wall. Toothless kept his measured pace until finally the Time Flyer stopped seeming so panicked. By the time Toothless was in sniffing distance, the Time Flyer was slowly lowering its head in submission. The blue disappeared from Toothless' scales and the dragon turned around to Hiccup, his pupils wide and relaxed once more. Hiccup still kept his own approach slow, the Time Flyer nervously glancing between Hiccup and the Night Fury. Hey, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. Toothless warbled something Hiccup assumed was an agreement, gently moving behind the dragon to urge it forward, closer to his rider. Hiccup held out the framework to the dragons. I need to put this on your tail fin. It will help you fly without injuring you further. The Time Flyer looked to Toothless, who brought his own tail fin forward, bringing it close for the Time Flyer to see. Toothless warbled some more, and while the Time Flyer still seemed very wary, it laid down and brought its injured tail forward so that Hiccup could work on it. Thank you. Hiccup made sure to tell the scared dragon. This is going to help you. I promise. Once close enough to touch the dragon's tail, Hiccup gave the yellow scales a few gentle pets to try to ease the dragon into being touched. Simultaneously, Hiccup also tried to get a good look at the injury. How is it? Astrid called out. Not too bad, Hiccup called back. It didn't look too irritated, thank the gods. Fishlegs had managed to get some stitches in, too, which should help speed up the healing process, but Fishlegs had struggled with the Time Flyer not